Wake up, officer. Please wake up. Your colleagues are waiting for you.
Some nights are louder than the day, not because of sound, but because of silence. The kind of silence that makes your skin itch, like the world is holding its breath. On a night like this, in a quiet town in Dallas, Texas, a chain of events began that no one could stop. A story that would ripple across lives and leave scars deeper than wounds. People would later argue about who was guilty, who was innocent, and who simply stood by, watching the storm unravel. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just a story about love or loss or betrayal. It was a story about how one choice, made in the shadows, can flip an entire life upside down. And the hardest truth? Anyone could have been in their shoes. So let's step back. Let's start where the fire first sparked. The Harrison family wasn't known for drama. On the outside, they looked like a perfect picture. A hard-working father named Mark, a devoted mother named Linda, and their teenage daughter Emily, who had a smile that could light up a room. They lived in a modest brick house, the kind you'd drive past without a second glance. But behind closed doors, every family carries secrets, and the Harrison secret was about to claw its way into the open. Mark worked long hours at a shipping company, often leaving before sunrise and coming home well past dinner. Linda, once a nurse, had given up her career to raise Emily. At first, she found comfort in her routine, but over the years, the silence of the house began to weigh on her. The loneliness turned sharp, carving pieces out of her spirit. And Emily, like many 17-year-olds, was restless. She wanted out of the small-town life, out of the endless rules, out of the shadow of her parents' quiet disappointments. She dreamed of moving to New York, of chasing a life bigger than the brick walls of her neighborhood. But the storm began not with Emily, not with Linda, not even with Mark. It began with a stranger. On a late Friday night, while the Harrisons sat around their worn-down kitchen table, someone knocked on the door. The sound was sharp, urgent. Linda opened it, and there he stood, a man with tired eyes and a voice too soft for his frame. His name was Daniel, and he claimed his car had broken down just a mile away. At first, it seemed ordinary, just a stranger in need of help. Mark offered to drive him to the nearest mechanic, but something about Daniel didn't sit right with Emily. She noticed the way his eyes darted, the way he paused before answering simple questions. And when he left, she felt a chill, as if a shadow had slipped inside their home with him. 2 days later, the shadow returned. Daniel wasn't a stranger who stumbled on their doorstep by accident. He had chosen this house, this family. He came back, knocking again, this time when Mark wasn't home. Linda answered, surprised, confused. But Daniel had a way with words, a way of making desperation sound like charm. He said he just wanted to thank her for the kindness, that he didn't know many people in town, that sometimes he just needed someone to talk to. And Linda, starved of attention, let him in. That was the moment. The crack in the wall. It started with coffee at the kitchen counter, then longer conversations on the porch, then moments where time seemed to stretch too close, too dangerous. Emily watched it unfold, her suspicion turning into silent fury. She wanted to tell her father, but part of her didn't want to see her mother destroyed. And yet destruction was coming, whether she spoke or not. Now pause for a moment. Think about this. How many lives have been torn apart not by enemies, but by the people invited in? A friend, a neighbor, a co-worker, someone who seems harmless until they aren't. That's what makes stories like this so dangerous. They remind us how easily the line between safety and danger can blur. As the weeks passed, Daniel's visits became more frequent. Linda smiled more, laughed more, but Emily noticed it wasn't the laugh of happiness. It was the laugh of escape, the kind people use when they're running from something inside. And then one night everything tipped. Emily woke up past midnight to get a glass of water. The house was quiet, except for a faint murmur. She followed the sound and froze at the sight. Her mother sitting at the kitchen table with Daniel, their hands too close, their faces too soft. It wasn't an affair yet, but it was something that could burn hotter than fire. Emily didn't say a word. She just stood in the shadows, her heart racing, her throat dry. She hated Daniel. She hated what he was doing to her mother. But most of all, she hated the truth. Part of her mother wanted this. Here's the controversial part. Was Linda wrong for letting Daniel in, for craving attention that her husband no longer gave? Or was she just human, trapped in a life that had drained her spirit? People still argue about this, even today. But one fact remains. Choices have consequences. And Emily's silence was a choice. The first real disaster struck a week later. Mark came home early from work, exhausted, carrying takeout for the family. When he walked through the door, Daniel was there, sitting in the living room with Linda. The air went sharp like glass about to shatter. Mark froze. Linda stammered. Daniel smiled as if nothing was wrong. That was the beginning of the end. From that day, suspicion poisoned the Harrison household. Mark grew distant, Linda grew defensive, and Emily felt like she was drowning in secrets too heavy for her age. Daniel didn't stop coming. If anything, his presence grew bolder, like he thrived on the chaos. But what no one realized then was that Daniel wasn't just a man looking for companionship. He carried a past darker than any of them could imagine. And soon, that darkness would swallow them all. And here's where you lean in. Because the story is only just beginning. What happened in that living room didn't just threaten a marriage, it threatened everything. Friendships, reputations, even lives. By the time the truth finally came out, people would be left asking, who really destroyed the Harrisons? Daniel, Linda, or the silence of those who saw and said nothing? Silence can be dangerous, but lies are poison. Once they're poured into a family, they spread through every conversation, every glance, every quiet moment at the dinner table. By the time you realize what's happening, it's already too late. For the Harrisons, the poison had already seeped in. After that night when Mark walked in to find Daniel sitting in his living room, nothing was ever the same again. Mark didn't confront Linda, not directly. He didn't scream, didn't throw things, didn't demand answers. Instead, he sank into a colder silence, the kind that hurts worse than shouting. He went to work earlier, came home later, and when he did sit down at the table, he barely spoke. Linda tried to keep things normal, tried to pretend Daniel was just a neighbor who needed help, but deep down she knew. She knew Mark didn't believe her. She knew her marriage was cracking. And Emily? She was caught in the middle. She felt the tension pressing down on her like a storm cloud. At school, she kept her head down. At home, she avoided her parents, sneaking off to her room as soon as dinner was done. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's face, his smile, that strange calmness in his eyes like he knew something they didn't. And she was right. He did. Let me tell you something people often forget. The most dangerous person isn't the one who bursts in with a weapon, it's the one who slips in with a story. Daniel was one of those men. He didn't need force. He used charm, patience, and carefully planted seeds. Seeds of doubt, seeds of fear. And behind those tired eyes, Daniel hid a history that, if revealed, would shake the town to its core. A week after the living room incident, Mark made a decision. He invited one of his closest friends, Officer Ryan Collins, a local cop, to stop by the house. Not for dinner, not for drinks, but to just check in. Linda didn't suspect anything at first, but Emily did. She could tell from the way her father spoke that he was testing the waters. Ryan was no ordinary cop. He'd been on the force for 15 years, known for his sharp instincts and unshakable sense of duty. But he was also known for something else. He was stubborn. Once he set his eyes on something, he didn't let go. When he walked into the Harrison home that evening, he noticed things right away. The tension between Mark and Linda, the way Emily avoided eye contact, the faint trace of men's cologne that didn't match Mark's. Ryan didn't say anything, not at first, but his mind was already working. And that's when Daniel walked in. Yes, he came back, bold as ever. He stepped through the doorway like he belonged there, with that same unsettling smile. And the room froze. Mark clenched his jaw. Linda's hands shook as she poured coffee. Emily felt her stomach twist into knots. But Ryan just stared. Evening, Daniel said smoothly, as if he hadn't just crashed into the middle of a family's unraveling. I hope I'm not interrupting. Mark didn't answer. Linda forced a polite smile. Emily looked away. And Ryan? He extended a hand. Name's Ryan Collins. And you are? Daniel shook his hand firmly. Daniel, just a friend. But in that brief handshake, Ryan felt it. Something off. The grip was steady, too steady, almost practiced. And when Daniel looked him in the eye, there was no warmth, just calculation. That moment set off alarms in Ryan's head. Later that night, as Ryan drove home, his thoughts wouldn't let him rest. He'd dealt with men like Daniel before. The kind who showed up out of nowhere, slipped into lives, and left chaos in their wake. Something about him didn't add up. So Ryan did what cops do best. He started digging. Here's where the story takes a darker turn. Because what Ryan found out about Daniel wasn't just concerning, it was terrifying. Records showed Daniel had lived in 3 different states over the past 10 years. Each time he'd moved suddenly. Each time there were whispers of trouble. Complaints from neighbors. Reports of late-night arguments. Police calls that ended with unresolved in the file. But the strangest part? No charges ever stuck. It was as if Daniel knew how to dance just outside the law's reach. And then came the part that made Ryan's blood run cold. In one of those towns, a woman had gone missing. A woman who, according to neighbors, had been seen with Daniel days before she disappeared. Her body was never found. Now ask yourself, if you were in Ryan's shoes, what would you do? Would you go straight to Mark and tell him his wife was entertaining a man with a past like that? Would you go to Linda and beg her to see reason? Or would you wait, watch, and gather more proof before making your move? Ryan chose the third option, and that decision would cost him dearly. Back at the Harrison home, things were spiraling faster than anyone realized. Linda's attachment to Daniel deepened, not out of love but out of escape. Mark grew more bitter, more distant. Emily began sneaking out late at night just to breathe, to escape the suffocating tension inside her own home. And Daniel tightened his grip. He started showing up uninvited, leaving little gifts on the porch, smiling at Emily in ways that made her skin crawl. And Linda, blinded by her own loneliness, didn't see the danger building. But Emily saw it. She felt it. And one night she finally confronted him. It was late, past midnight, when Emily found Daniel sitting in their backyard, smoking a cigarette. She froze at the sight. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice shaking. Daniel looked up, calm as ever. "Just thinking. Couldn't sleep." "You need to leave us alone," Emily snapped. "You're tearing this family apart." He chuckled softly, the sound low and unsettling. "Your family was broken long before I got here." Those words cut her like a knife, and for the first time, Emily saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not charm, not calmness, darkness. She turned and ran back inside, locking every door she could. But she knew. She knew it was too late. Daniel wasn't just a problem. He was a threat. And here's where the hook sharpens. Because just days later, tragedy struck. Officer Ryan Collins, the man who had been quietly investigating Daniel, was found unconscious in his patrol car on the edge of town. 25 doctors would later try to save him, each one puzzled by what had happened. But the answer wasn't in the hospital. It was sitting right there, in the Harrison family's backyard, smoking another cigarette. Daniel had played his hand, and the game was only beginning. Sometimes the strongest people fall in silence. No gunfight, no car chase, no dramatic shout for help, just a quiet collapse, leaving everyone else stunned and scrambling for answers. That's what happened to Officer Ryan Collins. The night started like any other. Ryan finished his shift, filed his reports, and drove his patrol car to the outskirts of town. He liked parking there sometimes, watching the highway lights stretch across the dark horizon. It gave him time to think, but that night he didn't get much time at all. A passing driver spotted the patrol car hours later, engine still running, headlights dimmed. Inside sat Ryan, slumped against the seat, motionless. His radio was on, his badge still pinned to his chest. And his gun? Still holstered. No struggle. No fight. Just a man whose body had suddenly betrayed him. It was late, past midnight, when Emily found Daniel sitting in their backyard smoking a cigarette. She froze at the sight. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice shaking. Daniel looked up, calm as ever. "Just thinking. Couldn't sleep." "You need to leave us alone," Emily snapped. "You're tearing this family apart." He chuckled softly, the sound low and unsettling. "Your family was broken long before I got here." Those words cut her like a knife. And for the first time, Emily saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not charm, not calmness, darkness. She turned and ran back inside, locking every door she could. But she knew. She knew it was too late. Daniel wasn't just a problem, he was a threat. And here's where the hook sharpens, because just days later, tragedy struck. Officer Ryan Collins, the man who had been quietly investigating Daniel, was found unconscious in his patrol car on the edge of town. 25 doctors would later try to save him, each one puzzled by what had happened. But the answer wasn't in the hospital. It was sitting right there, in the Harrison family's backyard, smoking another cigarette. Daniel had played his hand, and the game was only beginning. Sometimes the strongest people fall in silence. No gunfight, no car chase, no dramatic shout for help. Just a quiet collapse, leaving everyone else stunned and scrambling for answers. That's what happened to Officer Ryan Collins. The night started like any other. Ryan finished his shift, filed his reports, and drove his patrol car to the outskirts of town. He liked parking there sometimes, watching the highway lights stretch across the dark horizon. It gave him time to think. But that night, he didn't get much time at all. A passing driver spotted the patrol car hours later, engine still running, headlights dimmed. Inside sat Ryan, slumped against the seat, motionless. His radio was on, his badge still pinned to his chest, and his gun, still holstered. No struggle, no fight. Just a man whose body had suddenly betrayed him. By the time paramedics arrived, his pulse was faint, his breathing shallow. They rushed him to County General, lights flashing, sirens wailing. And that's where the real nightmare began. You'd think in a hospital filled with some of the best doctors in the state, they'd find answers quickly. But not this time. 25 doctors, cardiologists, neurologists, toxicologists, stood over Ryan's bed, scratching their heads. His blood pressure plummeted. His heart rhythm jumped erratically. His brain scans lit up with confusion. Every test contradicted the last. Every medication they tried seemed to fail. "He should be stabilizing," one doctor muttered. "He's young, healthy. This doesn't make sense," another whispered. But sense was nowhere to be found. Mark Harrison sat in the waiting room, fists clenched, leg bouncing nervously. He wasn't just worried about his friend, he was terrified of what this meant. Because deep down, he knew Ryan had been digging into Daniel. And now Ryan was lying on a hospital bed, half alive, with no explanation. Here's where the story twists, because while the doctors argued and the machines beeped, another scene was unfolding in the shadows. Daniel knew. Yes, he knew what had happened to Ryan. He knew why 25 doctors couldn't figure it out. Because he was the reason. Daniel had always been clever. Too clever. He'd mastered the art of staying just out of reach, never leaving enough evidence, never making a move that could be traced. And with Ryan, he'd been subtle. So subtle the doctors wouldn't even think to look for it. That cigarette Emily saw him smoking in the backyard? It wasn't just a cigarette. Daniel had a habit of carrying things laced with substances most people wouldn't recognize. A shake of ash here, a smear on a door handle there, a casual pat on the back. To anyone else, nothing. To his target, a ticking time bomb. Ryan never stood a chance. Back at the Harrison home, Linda tried to keep things together. She told Emily to focus on school, tried to cook dinners, tried to convince Mark that Ryan's condition was just bad luck. But the truth was slipping through her fingers. Emily refused to eat at the same table as Daniel. She locked her door at night. She carried pepper spray in her backpack. At 15, she was learning the kind of fear no child should have to carry. Mark grew angrier. His silence turned into sharp words. He accused Linda of being blind, of letting a stranger worm his way into their lives. But Linda, torn between guilt and denial, snapped back. "You're the one who shut me out," she shouted one night, her voice echoing through the house. "Daniel listens, you don't." Those words cut Mark deeper than any knife. To hear his wife compare him to the man he despised most, it was almost unbearable. But he swallowed his rage, because he knew the truth would come out eventually. And it did. Just not the way he expected. At County General, Ryan's case became front-page news. Local officer critical, doctors baffled. The community rallied, holding candlelight vigils outside the hospital. People posted prayers on social media. Police officers rotated in and out of the waiting room, refusing to leave their brother alone. But Daniel, he thrived in the chaos. He stood among the crowd one evening, candle in hand, pretending to grieve. He hugged Linda, whispered to Mark, patted Emily's shoulder. To everyone else, he looked like a concerned friend. But Emily saw through it. She saw the way his eyes glimmered with satisfaction when the doctors announced Ryan's condition was worsening, and she hated herself for staying silent. One night, unable to sleep, Emily snuck back into the hospital. She wanted to see Ryan for herself, to prove he was still fighting. She tiptoed past the nurses, slipped into his room, and froze at the sight. Ryan lay hooked up to tubes and wires, pale and fragile. His chest rose and fell shallowly. His eyes fluttered beneath closed lids. Machines beeped steadily, a cruel reminder that his life was hanging by threads. Emily whispered, "I'm sorry. Sorry for not warning him sooner. Sorry for not telling her dad everything she knew about Daniel. Sorry for being so afraid." But as she stood there, she noticed something odd, something the doctors had missed. A faint mark on Ryan's wrist, like a burn. It was tiny, almost invisible, but it looked deliberate, like contact with something corrosive. She leaned closer, her heart racing, and that's when she heard it. 3 words, whispered so faintly she almost thought she imagined it. "Watch. The smoke." Her eyes widened. Ryan wasn't gone. He was fighting, and even in his broken state, he was trying to warn her. The next morning, Emily tried to tell her parents what she'd heard, but Mark brushed her off. "You were imagining it." Linda snapped, "Don't put pressure on yourself." And Daniel? Daniel just smiled. That smile told her everything. He knew she'd figured it out. Here's where the suspense deepens. Emily couldn't go to the police. Who would believe a teenager over a grown man who charmed everyone in sight? She couldn't go to her parents. They were too divided to see clearly. So she did the only thing she could. She went to someone who had nothing to lose. A prisoner. Yes, you heard that right. A man sitting behind bars, forgotten by society, was about to become the key to saving Ryan. Because unlike the 25 doctors, unlike the police, unlike her own parents, he had knowledge others overlooked. Knowledge about Daniel. But Emily didn't know how dangerous that decision would be, because sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. Sometimes it puts a target on your back. And as Ryan clung to life, as 25 doctors shook their heads, As the Harrisons' home cracked wider, Emily stepped into a world of secrets no teenager should ever touch. The fall of a cop was only the beginning. The war between truth and deception had just begun. When life leaves you with no safe place to turn, sometimes the only option left is the one people tell you to avoid. That's where Emily found herself, a teenager, carrying a secret heavier than most grown men could handle, standing outside the gray stone walls of the county prison. She knew she shouldn't be there. She knew she was risking everything, her safety, her reputation, her sanity. But she also knew the truth. 25 doctors couldn't help Ryan. Her father wouldn't listen. Her mother was blind, and Daniel was still smiling in her living room. If no one else could help, maybe someone locked away from the world, someone with nothing left to lose, might. The prison doors clanged shut behind her, the echo rattling her bones. She clutched the small notebook she carried everywhere, the one where she'd scribbled Ryan's faint words, "Watch the smoke." The guard led her down a corridor, past rows of cells where eyes followed her every step. Some sneered, some muttered, some just stared in silence. But one pair of eyes didn't look at her like she was prey. They looked at her like they already knew why she was there. That man's name was Caleb Walker. Caleb wasn't the kind of prisoner who blended into the background. He had a presence, even sitting on the edge of his cot, hands folded, eyes sharp. Rumors said he'd once been a paramedic before everything went wrong, before an incident left him branded as reckless and dangerous. Society called him a criminal, but inside prison walls people whispered another truth. Caleb noticed things others missed. Emily sat across from him in the visiting room, her hands trembling. She didn't know where to start, but Caleb did. "You've seen something," he said quietly, his voice calm, measured. "Something the doctors can't." She froze. How do you know?" "Because people don't come here unless they're desperate, and you, kid, you look desperate." Emily swallowed hard and slid her notebook across the table. "He said these words, Ryan Collins. He's a cop. 25 doctors can't figure out what's wrong with him, but before he slipped under, he whispered this. Watch the smoke." Caleb read the words, his brow furrowing. Then he leaned back, eyes narrowing in thought. Smoke. Not fire. Not ash. Smoke. "What does it mean?" Emily asked. Caleb tapped the table slowly. "It means he was poisoned." The word hit Emily like a thunderclap. Poison. Her mind raced back. Daniel with his cigarettes, Daniel's casual touch, Daniel's sly grin when the doctors announced Ryan wasn't improving. "But the doctors tested for toxins," she stammered. "They said nothing showed up." Caleb shook his head. "That's because they're looking for the obvious: rat poison, heavy metals, the usual suspects. But smoke? That points to something else, something harder to trace. There are substances that cling to the skin, soak in slowly, break a body down over hours or days. If he said, 'Watch the smoke,' he was trying to tell you exactly that. The source wasn't food or drink. It was contact, something on him, around him, something no blood panel would catch unless they knew where to look." Emily's stomach twisted. She thought of the faint burn mark on Ryan's wrist, the way Daniel's hand always seemed to linger when he shook someone's hand or clapped them on the shoulder. She whispered, "Daniel." Caleb looked at her carefully. "Who's Daniel?" And that's when Emily broke. She spilled everything. How Daniel appeared out of nowhere. How he charmed her mother. How her father grew colder. How Ryan started digging into his past. How Daniel smiled when Ryan collapsed. Her voice cracked as she spoke, but Caleb never interrupted. He just listened, eyes darkening with every detail. Finally he said, "You're right to be afraid. This man, he's not just playing games, he's playing control. And if he knows you figured it out..." He paused, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You're in danger." Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to run. She wanted to hide. But most of all, she wanted someone, anyone, to help her carry this weight. "Please," she whispered. "Tell me how to save him." Caleb leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Listen carefully. If it's contact poisoning, the key isn't just in his blood. It's in his skin, his clothes, maybe even his hair, something that doesn't wash away easily. The doctors need to look at what touched him, uniform, gear, anything he handled before collapsing. They won't think of it unless someone tells them. You need to make them look. That's the only chance he has." Emily nodded furiously, her heart pounding. For the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of hope. But then Caleb added something that chilled her to the bone. "And kid, don't confront him. Not yet. If this man is who I think he is, he won't hesitate to silence you. Let the doctors catch it first, then the truth will follow." When Emily left the prison that day, the world outside felt different. The sky was the same, the streets were the same, but everything inside her had shifted. She wasn't just a scared teenager anymore. She was carrying a mission, a secret that could save Ryan, or get her killed. At home, she kept quiet. Daniel was there again, laughing with Linda in the kitchen, leaning against the counter like he belonged. Mark was upstairs pretending to work, but really just avoiding the man he despised. Emily slipped past them, clutching her notebook tighter than ever. She had to be careful. One wrong word, one wrong glance, and Daniel would know. But she also knew this. Caleb's warning wasn't just about Ryan. It was about her family too. If Daniel was willing to put a cop in a hospital bed, what would he do to a teenage girl who knew too much? Meanwhile, at County General, the doctors kept trying and failing. More machines, more tests, more confusion. Some whispered about pulling Ryan off life support. Others argued to keep pushing, but no one had the answer. No one, except a prisoner locked behind bars. Emily's next move would decide everything. Would she find the courage to speak up, to push the doctors toward the clue Caleb had given her? Or would her silence bury Ryan once and for all? The Harrisons' house was quiet that night. Too quiet. Emily lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Caleb's words echoing in her head. Don't confront him. But she couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel already knew, because just before she closed her eyes, she heard footsteps outside her door. A pause. Then a faint whisper, low and chilling. Smoke doesn't lie. Her heart nearly stopped. She waited until the footsteps faded before she let herself breathe again. But in that moment, she realized the truth. Daniel wasn't just dangerous. He was watching her. And he knew she was watching him too. The waiting room at Cedar Grove Medical Center looked nothing like a place of healing. It felt like a storm shelter right before a tornado rips through, a crowded, suffocating chamber where fear and anger clashed against each other in the stale hospital air. Families clutched styrofoam cups of coffee that had long gone cold. Officers stood in rigid silence, and reporters loitered near the doors, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything that would explain what was happening to Officer Ryan Cole. Inside, Ryan's body was losing ground. Machines beeped in stubborn rhythm, doctors shouted instructions that contradicted each other, and still, the man everyone in this town once thought unbreakable lay motionless on the table. The doctors looked like soldiers who had already lost the war. They were sweating, drained, and out of ideas. But no one would say those words out loud. Not yet. Every so often, a nurse would open the double doors, step out, and give the crowd a bland update. He's stable for now. Or, we're running additional tests. But everyone in that room knew the truth. Their updates were a mask, a way to stretch hope just a little longer. And in the middle of it all sat Marcus Hale, the prisoner who wasn't supposed to matter. Shackled, watched by 2 guards, and shoved into the farthest corner of the waiting room like a forgotten shadow. He didn't look nervous. He didn't even look afraid. His eyes kept shifting, locked not on the crowd, not on the chaos, but on the patterns no one else seemed to notice. The timing of the beeps echoing through the hall, the strained voices of the doctors behind the doors, The look of desperation etched onto Emily Cole's face as she clutched her children close. The town turns on itself. The longer the updates dragged, the more restless the crowd became. At first, people whispered quietly, as if speaking too loud might tip fate the wrong way. But whispers became murmurs, and murmurs became arguments. "He was poisoned," one man shouted from the back, his voice rising above the tension. "Somebody wanted him dead. You think a healthy man just drops like that?" Others countered, "No, it was the stress. He's been working double shifts for years. That kind of pressure breaks the strongest of men." Soon blame began to fly in every direction, toward the department, toward the mayor, even toward Ryan himself for not taking care of his health. Emily sat silent in the corner, her hand trembling as she held onto her daughter's shoulder. She had no words left, none that mattered. Her husband was fighting for his life, and the town that once cheered for him was already tearing him apart. The guard standing near Marcus shifted uncomfortably as the arguments got louder. To them, the scene was routine. People always looked for villains when tragedy struck. But what they didn't know, what no one yet knew, was that the man they were guarding was about to change everything. Marcus notices. Marcus leaned forward, his chains clinking softly as he adjusted his seat. His eyes were sharp, focused, as though he were piecing together a puzzle. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "This ain't no heart attack, not the way they think." The guard closest to him turned his head. "What did you just say?" Marcus looked up, calm, almost amused. "Nothing. Just talking to myself." But in truth, he'd already seen something that the 25 doctors inside had overlooked. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't luck. It was something far more dangerous, perspective. Marcus had lived a life on the edges of society, where noticing the smallest detail often meant survival. The way a man's lips turned pale, the way a breath hitched unnaturally, the smell in the air that didn't belong. He noticed what others dismissed. Now, with Ryan slipping away behind those hospital doors, Marcus knew he was staring at one of those moments. Doctors under pressure. Inside, the medical team was falling apart. The lead doctor, Dr. Wallace, slammed his hand against the table. "We've done every test, every scan. Nothing explains why he's crashing like this." A younger doctor spoke up nervously. "Could it be toxic exposure? Something environmental?" "We tested for that already. Negative," Wallace snapped. Another nurse suggested, "Could it be neurological? Maybe a rare seizure disorder?" "Enough," Wallace barked. He ran a hand down his face, his eyes bloodshot. "We are 25 of the best-trained professionals in this state, and we can't even agree on what we're fighting. He's dying in front of us, and we're stabbing in the dark." The room fell into heavy silence, broken only by the relentless beeping of the machines. Ryan's pulse was fading, his breathing shallow. His wife's face flashed in Wallace's mind, and for the first time in his career, he felt the crushing weight of true helplessness. The protest sparks back in the waiting room. Tension finally snapped. Someone yelled that the police were covering something up. Another shouted that the hospital was incompetent. Within minutes, phones were out, live streams were rolling, and social media lit up with hashtags calling for accountability. The crowd spilled into the parking lot, shouting at officers who tried to maintain order. It wasn't just about Ryan anymore. It was about everything. Frustration with authority, mistrust in the system, anger at years of feeling unheard. The hospital had become a battlefield, and the whole country was watching. Emily covered her daughter's ears as shouts of, "They're hiding the truth," echoed through the glass doors. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She had already lost her trust in the world outside. She couldn't bear the thought of losing her husband too. And through it all, Marcus sat still, eyes narrowed. He wasn't watching the protesters. He was listening. Listening to the faint, uneven rhythm of the machines beyond the walls. The whisper. Finally, the double doors opened and Dr. Wallace stepped out, his face grim. The room fell into silence. "He's failing," Wallace admitted quietly. We've done everything we can. If we don't find the cause soon. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Emily let out a strangled sob. Her son clutched her hand, his face pale with fear. The crowd erupted, some shouting at Wallace, others crying out in despair. Cameras flashed, reporters fired questions. Chaos swallowed the waiting room whole. And then, in the middle of that storm, Marcus leaned forward, his voice low but piercing. "Check his lungs." The words cut through the noise like a blade. The guards froze. The doctors glanced at each other. Wallace turned slowly, his eyes narrowing at the shackled man in the corner. "What did you just say?" Marcus repeated, calm, deliberate. "Check his lungs. You're looking in the wrong place." The room went still. Every eye locked on him, a prisoner in chains daring to tell 25 doctors what they had missed. The shock Wallace's face flushed with anger. "You have no idea what you're talking about." But Marcus didn't flinch. His gaze was steady, cold. "I know what drowning from the inside looks like. I've seen it before. You're wasting time chasing the wrong answers." Emily's head snapped up, her tear-stained eyes locking on Marcus. For a moment, she didn't see a prisoner. She saw the only person willing to say something the doctors hadn't. The crowd erupted again, voices clashing, some calling Marcus crazy, others demanding the doctors listen. Phones streamed every second of it. The story was no longer just about a dying cop. It was about a prisoner who might hold the key to saving him. And for the first time since the chaos began, Dr. Wallace hesitated. Could it be possible? Could this man in chains have seen something 25 trained professionals missed? The ticking clock grew louder in his mind. Ryan had minutes, maybe less. Wallace swallowed hard, his pride warring with desperation. Finally, he whispered to a nurse, "Get a scan of his lungs, now." The nurse bolted through the doors. Silence fell. Marcus leaned back, eyes never leaving Wallace's. And in that silence, one truth became clear. Whether they liked it or not, the fate of Officer Ryan Cole might now rest in the hands of a prisoner. The moment Dr. Wallace gave the order, the room split down the middle. Half the people thought he'd lost his mind for listening to a prisoner. The other half thought he was finally doing the only sensible thing left. The nurses rushed Ryan into the imaging room, their shoes squeaking against the linoleum floors, while Emily pressed herself against the glass window, desperate for even the smallest glimpse of her husband. The crowd outside the hospital had grown louder, their chants echoing through the halls. Police officers tightened their perimeter, holding back protesters with raised arms and strained voices. What had started as fear and confusion was turning into open rebellion. But in that waiting room, all eyes were on Marcus. Shackled hands, prison jumpsuit, calm as if he were the only man who wasn't drowning in panic. His lips moved slightly, murmuring words that no one could hear. To some it looked like arrogance. To Emily it looked like certainty. The first results minutes later, the nurse returned, holding a set of scans in trembling hands. She passed them to Dr. Wallace without a word. The doctor unfolded them quickly, eyes darting across the images. And then he froze. Everyone waited for him to speak, but he didn't. His jaw clenched, his forehead furrowed, and the color drained from his face. Finally, he whispered, "It's fluid." The room erupted in noise. Doctors scrambled closer, their voices colliding in a mess of theories. "Pulmonary edema," one shouted. "Could be internal bleeding," another cried. "Poison. It has to be poison." But Wallace silenced them with a sharp gesture. He stared at Marcus, the weight of humiliation heavy in his eyes. "How did you know?" Marcus speaks. Marcus leaned forward, the chains on his wrists clinking softly. His voice was calm, almost detached. "You were treating him like it was his heart. But his breathing, the way it slowed, the shallow gasps, the skin turning blue before his pulse even weakened. I've seen it before." Wallace narrowed his eyes. "Where?" Marcus didn't blink. "In prison. A man smuggled in cleaning chemicals, tried to take himself out. He didn't choke on it. He drowned inside his own lungs. Everyone thought it was a heart problem until it was too late." The words fell heavy on the crowd. Emily's stomach twisted. The idea that her husband might be suffering from something the doctors never even considered made her both furious and terrified. Wallace exhaled sharply. Pride burned in his chest, but so did the knowledge that the prisoner might have just given them their first real lead. The pushback. Not everyone agreed. One of the younger doctors stepped forward, voice sharp. "You're seriously going to listen to him? He's a convicted criminal. We have protocols, science, decades of training." Marcus cut him off, his eyes hard. "And how's that working out for you so far?" The young doctor's face reddened, but before he could respond, Emily's voice broke through the noise. "If he has something that can save my husband, I don't care who he is. You listen to him, you listen." Her words shook the room. She was no longer the silent, grieving wife. She was fire and steel, her desperation boiling into fury. For the first time, Marcus's gaze softened. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply nodded as if to tell her, "I'll try." The rest of the doctors moved quickly now, rushing Ryan into a specialized ward. Tubes were inserted, fluid samples were taken, and new machines were wheeled into place. Marcus, still shackled, could only listen from the hallway as shouts echoed from the room. "Pressure dropping! Get the ventilator ready! Drain his lungs now!" Every sound was a reminder of how close Ryan was to the edge. Finally, after what felt like hours, Wallace stepped out again, his scrubs damp with sweat. His voice was hoarse, his body shaking. "We drained almost a liter of fluid. He's still weak, but he's stabilizing." The waiting room gasped. Emily broke down, collapsing into her daughter's arms. Hope rushed in like oxygen after suffocation. Reporters scrambled, capturing the moment. The live stream feeds exploded. The narrative was no longer just officer dying. It was prisoner saves cop by spotting what doctors missed. The fallout. But not everyone saw it as a miracle. Some accused the doctors of incompetence. Others claimed the whole event was staged to distract from something bigger. Conspiracy theories flooded social media. They poisoned him and used the prisoner as a cover, some wrote. Outside, the protest doubled in size. Signs went up. "Justice for Ryan. The system is broken." Police struggled to control the crowd. The hospital became ground zero for a storm no one could contain. And in the middle of it all sat Marcus, silent. He wasn't celebrated. He wasn't cheered. He was still a man in chains. But for the first time in years, he wasn't invisible. Emily's conflict. That night, Emily sat by Ryan's bedside. Her fingers curled around his limp hand. Machines beeped softly, each sound a reminder that he was alive, but only barely. Her thoughts kept circling back to Marcus. The prisoner had seen what no one else could. He had given her husband another chance. But could she trust him? Could she rely on a man who was supposed to be dangerous, someone the courts had locked away from society? Her heart was torn. Gratitude battled suspicion. Kindness battled fear. She whispered to Ryan, her voice trembling. "Why him? Why was he the only one who could see it? What does that mean?" Her husband didn't answer. His chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, his face pale under the harsh lights. And in that silence, Emily realized something terrifying. Her husband's survival might now depend on a man she had every reason not to trust. Marcus under watch. The guards weren't blind. They saw the shift in the room, the way people looked at Marcus now. Some with curiosity, some with respect, others with suspicion. One of the guards leaned down and muttered, "Don't get used to it. You're still going back in the cage." Marcus didn't respond. He wasn't looking for glory. He wasn't looking for freedom. He was looking at Ryan, at the faint rise and fall of his chest. Something about it gnawed at him, told him the story wasn't finished. Because if he was right, and he usually was, then draining the fluid wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The final twist of the night. Just before dawn, alarms screamed from Ryan's room. Nurses sprinted inside, monitors flashing red. Emily jolted awake in her chair, heart hammering. Wallace's voice cut through the chaos. "He's crashing again!" Emily stumbled to the door, tears blurring her vision. No, you said he was stable. You said... Wallace shoved past her, barking orders. Something else is happening. It's not just fluid. This goes deeper. Emily's knees buckled, but a strong hand caught her arm. She looked up and saw Marcus, the guards struggling to keep him back as he fought against their grip. His voice thundered through the hall. You're still not looking in the right place. The doctors froze. Emily stared. The crowd, the guards, the cameras, everyone locked on him. Marcus's eyes burned with intensity. He knew. He had seen something none of them had dared to consider. And for the first time, Dr. Wallace didn't argue. He turned toward Marcus and whispered, "Then tell us where to look." The alarms didn't stop. Red lights pulsed above Ryan's bed, nurses shouted over each other, and the hiss of machines filled the sterile air. Emily pressed her hands to the glass, tears streaming down her face as she begged for God to intervene. Her husband was slipping again, and this time the doctors had no excuses left. Dr. Wallace barked orders, his voice cracking under the strain. "Increase oxygen, push epinephrine, check vitals every 30 seconds. But even as the team scrambled, Ryan's body betrayed them. His skin turned ashen, his chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged bursts. Wallace knew they were running out of time. And then Marcus's voice cut through the chaos like thunder. "You drained his lungs, but you didn't ask why they filled in the first place." The doctors froze. Wallace turned toward him, eyes burning with a mix of anger and desperation. "Then tell us, what are we missing?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Something's poisoning him from the inside. You're treating the symptom, not the cause." The clash of pride and truth. The younger doctors scoffed. One of them, Dr. Patel, snapped, "This is ridiculous. We're listening to a criminal like he's the attending physician. He has no training, no credentials." Marcus leaned forward in his chair, the chains biting into his wrists. "Credentials don't save lives. Paying attention does. And right now you're blind." The room erupted. Some of the doctors shouted for security to drag him away. Others demanded they at least test his theory. The guards tightened their grip on Marcus, but he didn't resist. His eyes stayed locked on Wallace. Wallace's chest heaved. Every fiber of his pride screamed at him to dismiss the prisoner, to cling to the years of education and status that separated them. But another voice whispered louder, the voice of a dying cop, the cries of his wife, the eyes of the entire town watching through cameras and live streams. Finally, Wallace exhaled shakily. "Run a full toxicology panel. Everything. Don't leave a stone unturned." The staff hesitated, then scattered to obey. Emily collapsed back into her chair, clutching her son against her chest. She didn't know if Marcus was right. She didn't even care about right. She cared about hope. And right now, he was the only one giving it. The town's boiling point outside, the protest had transformed into something darker. Overnight buses had brought in people from neighboring towns. Some came with candles, holding vigils. Others came with fury, holding signs that screamed, "Corruption kills." Justice for Ryan. Doctors are liars. Police held the line, but tempers flared. Chants turned into shoves. Shoves turned into fists. The hospital parking lot became a powder keg ready to ignite. News anchors from across the country set up outside the barricades, their cameras catching every chant, every scuffle, every sobbing child clinging to their mother's hand. The narrative had shifted. This wasn't just about Officer Ryan anymore. It was about trust. Trust in the police, trust in the medical system, trust in the truth itself. And at the center of it all stood Marcus Hale, the man no one had expected to matter. The whisper in the dark hours later, the toxicology results came back. Dr. Wallace scanned them, his face tightening with every line. His hands trembled as he flipped the pages, his lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, he slammed the folder shut. "It's foreign agents. Traces of a chemical compound not normally found in the body. Someone did poison him." Gasps erupted across the room. Emily's heart dropped into her stomach. The word poison echoed in her mind like a curse. She grabbed Wallace's sleeve. What does that mean? Can you fix it? Can you save him? Wallace hesitated. His silence said more than words ever could. And then from the corner, Marcus spoke again. His voice was quiet, but every syllable carried weight. You're looking at something engineered, not accidental. Somebody wanted him to suffer slow. The room turned to stare at him. His eyes were dark, distant, as though the poison wasn't just in Ryan's veins, but in Marcus's memory. Emily's stomach churned. You've seen this before. Marcus nodded once. Yeah, too many times. Emily's breaking point. That night, Emily sat by Ryan's bed again, her heart a battlefield. Anger, fear, and gratitude collided inside her chest. She stared at Marcus through the glass window where the guards kept him restrained. Every instinct screamed at her to hate him, to see him as nothing more than a convict, a threat, the kind of man her husband had sworn to protect society from. But another part of her, quieter, yet unshakable, saw something else. A man who had noticed when no one else did. A man who might hold the key to saving Ryan. She pressed her forehead to Ryan's hand. I don't know who to trust anymore, she whispered, but I can't let you go. Not like this. Not when there's still a chance. Marcus's chains. Later, when the guards tried to drag Marcus back to his cell for the night, Emily stepped into their path. Her voice was calm, but it carried steel. He stays. The guards exchanged nervous glances. Ma'am, he's a prisoner. We can't. Emily's eyes blazed. My husband is alive right now because of him. If he leaves and something else happens, and you take away the only person who sees what you don't, then you'll have his blood on your hands. The room fell silent. Even the guards hesitated under her gaze. Finally, they relented, chaining Marcus to a chair near the window where he could still see Ryan. Marcus didn't thank her. He didn't smile. He just gave her a single nod. The revelation by dawn, Ryan's body twitched violently. Machines screamed again, nurses sprinted in, and Emily's world cracked open once more. Wallace shouted, "The poison's moving fast. His organs are shutting down. We're losing him." Emily collapsed against the wall, sobbing uncontrollably. No, please God, not again." And then Marcus's voice boomed from his chair. "It's not just the poison, it's the antidote. Whatever they used, it reacts with standard treatments. If you pump him full of meds, you're making it worse." The doctors froze. Wallace's eyes widened, realization dawning too late. Emily's heart pounded as she turned to Marcus. "Then how do we save him?" Marcus's gaze locked on hers, steady and unflinching. "You'll have to trust me." The room went silent. The man in chains had just claimed the only path forward. And Emily knew deep down she didn't have a choice. The air inside the hospital was so heavy it felt alive, pressing down on everyone who walked its hallways. By now, the world outside had caught wind of Officer Ryan's condition. News crews stood outside the glass entrance, lights flashing against the windows like a storm of judgment. Inside, 25 doctors had already bowed their heads, admitting defeat. Each test came back normal, each scan gave no answers. And yet Ryan's body kept failing. The man who once commanded entire precincts with his confidence was reduced to a pale shadow, bound to a bed by tubes and wires. The public wanted answers. His family wanted miracles. The doctors wanted relief. And the prisoner, Marcus, wanted to be heard. But who listens to a man in chains when men in white coats had already given their verdict? Rumors on fire. By morning, the silence in the waiting rooms was gone, replaced by angry voices. Protesters had gathered outside, signs in hand. Some accused the hospital of covering up malpractice. Others shouted that Ryan was a victim of corruption, a cop who had crossed the wrong line. And then there were the whispers, spreading faster than wildfire, that a black prisoner knew more than the doctors. That rumor alone poured gasoline on an already burning conflict. Supporters of Ryan's family called it an insult. Critics of the system called it justice. Every news channel looped the story until the world stopped to ask, how could a criminal see what the educated missed? Inside, Ryan's sister Rebecca trembled as she scrolled through her phone. "They're tearing him apart out there," she whispered to Claire, their mother. "Half the world thinks he deserved this. The other half thinks the hospital's hiding the truth." Claire clenched her jaw. "None of them know him. None of them loved him. All I know is my son is dying, and nobody has the courage to admit they failed him." The doctors cracked behind closed doors. The medical team faced its own implosion. "We're at the brink of organ failure," Dr. Patel admitted, her hand shaking as she flipped through Ryan's chart. "If we don't find the source, his heart won't last another 48 hours. One resident slammed his notebook shut. "We've run every panel twice. Every toxin screen, every scan. It's not adding up." The room fell silent until Patel spoke again. "There's one thing we haven't done." She hesitated, her voice lowering. "We haven't listened to him." "You mean the prisoner?" a colleague scoffed. "You're seriously suggesting we trust his word over 24 specialists?" Patel's eyes burned. "I'm suggesting we don't let a man die because of pride." The tension was unbearable. For the first time, the doctors looked less like saviors and more like jurors trapped in their own doubt. Marcus speaks. That evening, Ryan's body went into another violent spasm. Alarms blared, nurses rushed in, and his mother screamed his name. Amid the chaos, Marcus stood, his chains clinking as he leaned forward. "You're wasting time," he barked at Patel. "This ain't random. Look at his throat again. Look at the swelling. Something's in there." The guard shoved him back, but Patel froze mid-motion. Her memory flashed. Yes, she had felt it before. Faint swelling, almost nothing at all. But she dismissed it. Now Marcus's voice dragged it back into the spotlight. "Shut him up," another doctor shouted. But Claire, with tears streaming down her face, screamed louder, "No, let him speak." The room froze. Authority no longer belonged to the doctors. It belonged to a desperate mother and a prisoner who saw what they missed. A break in the wall. Patel approached Ryan's bed, her hands trembling. She pressed along his neck again, this time slower, firmer. And there it was, the swelling, subtle but undeniable. "He's right," she whispered. The other doctors blinked in disbelief. Marcus's chains rattled as he leaned closer. "I told you, something's cutting off his air. It ain't in his blood, it's in his body." The room erupted with arguments. Some shouted about liability, others about security. But amid the chaos, Patel made the call. "Prep for an invasive exam. If something is lodged, we're pulling it out tonight." For the first time, the team followed a prisoner's lead. The reveal. When the scope slid down Ryan's throat, the entire room held its breath. Seconds passed. Then Patel gasped. Tiny, sharp fragments glistened under the light. "Glass," she whispered. The nurses recoiled. Rebecca covered her mouth. Claire nearly fainted. One by one, the pieces were removed. Small, jagged splinters embedded where no one thought to look. It explained everything. The spasms, the swelling, the choking. The silence in the room was unbearable. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Told you. Somebody fed him death in disguise." The words hung heavy. It was no longer a medical case. It was a crime scene. Trust and suspicion. When the procedure ended, Ryan was stable, but barely. His breathing eased, though his body remained weak from the torment. Claire grabbed Patel's arm. "He'll recover now, right?" Patel's face was pale. "We've stopped the immediate danger, but the damage from the shards could be permanent. We don't know yet." Rebecca turned toward Marcus. Her eyes were full of fear and curiosity. "How did you know? How could you possibly see what trained doctors missed?" Marcus didn't flinch. "Because I've seen it before. Not on cops, on prisoners, on people nobody cared about enough to save." The room went cold. His words cut deeper than the shards they'd just removed. The World Reacts news broke within hours. Headlines screamed, "Prisoner saves cop after doctors fail." Crowds outside the hospital doubled overnight. Some cheered Marcus as a hero. Others cursed his name, calling it a trick, a setup. Talk shows debated the irony. Commentators raged about the state of the medical system. Social media exploded with hashtags, half praising the prisoner, half condemning him. Inside, the ward was a fortress of suspicion. Every glance carried doubt. If Ryan had been poisoned, then someone close to him had fed him those shards. Was it a stranger, a colleague, a family member, or worse, was the hospital complicit? The breaking point. Ryan's mother sat by his bed, whispering prayers through tears. Marcus, chained again in the corner, stared at the monitors. Patel, exhausted, stood in the doorway, haunted by the reality. A prisoner had done her job better than her entire team. And then, as if the night couldn't carry any more weight, Ryan's body jerked again. His pulse spiked. The monitors screamed. Patel rushed forward. "No, no, not again," Marcus shouted over the chaos. "It's not over. Whoever did this didn't plan to stop with just glass." The room turned toward him, terrified. If he was right, Ryan wasn't just poisoned once, he was still under attack. The chapter ended not with relief, but with the realization that the battle had only begun. 25 doctors gave up, but a prisoner spotted what they all missed: glass hidden in his throat. Now here's the real question. If someone planted those shards, who was it? Was it a stranger? Someone inside the hospital? Or someone closer to Ryan than anyone dares to admit? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because the truth that's coming next will shake everything you believe. The hospital had been turned upside down by the discovery of glass in Ryan's throat. Overnight, security tripled. Every hallway buzzed with tension, and every shadow felt like a suspect. But the quietest, most unsettling presence in the room was Marcus, the prisoner who had forced everyone to look where no one dared. Ryan's monitors beeped steadily now, his breathing easier after the shards were removed. But the sense of victory was short-lived. Marcus's voice still echoed in Claire's mind. Whoever did this didn't plan to stop. She couldn't shake it. If he was right, then her son wasn't safe even here. And worse, no one knew who to trust. Fractures in trust. By morning, reporters screamed questions from the hospital steps. Was Officer Ryan poisoned deliberately? Did the doctors miss signs of foul play? Is it true a prisoner saved him? Inside, the medical team was in chaos. Some wanted Marcus silenced, sent back to prison before his influence spread further. Others argued they needed his insight more than ever. Patel sat in her office, her hands trembling over Ryan's chart. She replayed every step they had taken, every mistake they made. The guilt was unbearable. When the door opened, she expected another doctor, but it was Claire. "Why didn't you see it?" Claire asked, her voice cold. Patel swallowed hard. "Because I trusted the tests, not my instincts. I let arrogance blind me." Claire's tears burned. "A prisoner saved my son when 25 doctors didn't. How do you expect me to forgive that?" Patel had no answer. Marcus under fire. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in a locked room near the ward, guarded by 2 officers. His chains clinked as he leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The guards muttered about him, loud enough for him to hear. He's playing them. He wants attention. Or maybe he planted the glass himself. Marcus smirked. If I wanted him dead, he'd be gone already. Open your eyes, somebody's laughing at all of you. The guard stiffened. His confidence unnerved them. The second attack. Just before noon, Ryan's heart monitor spiked. Nurses swarmed the room, panic in their eyes. His breathing collapsed again, though the glass was gone. "What's happening?" Rebecca screamed. Patel rushed in, scanning the readings. "It's not the throat this time. His blood pressure's crashing." Claire clutched his hand. No, not again." Marcus, dragged into the hallway in chains, shouted over the chaos. "Check the IV bags." The guard holding him sneered. "Shut up." But Patel froze. Something about the panic in Marcus's voice made her turn. She tore open the IV line and sniffed the fluid. Her eyes widened in horror. "It's contaminated," she screamed. Nurses scrambled to switch the line, flushing Ryan's system, replacing every bag. Slowly, his vitals steadied. Everyone stared in stunned silence. The horrible realization. Claire collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Rebecca whispered, "Twice. Someone tried twice." Patel's voice shook. "This means the threat is here, inside the hospital." Marcus's chains rattled as he stepped forward. "Now you see. This ain't a mystery illness. Somebody wants him gone, and they're using your trust against you. The food, the water, the medicine, anything can be turned into a weapon." The guard tightened his grip, but Patel raised her hand. "No, he's right. If Marcus hadn't shouted, we'd be planning a funeral right now." The doctors looked at each other with fear. Every nurse, every orderly, every visitor had suddenly become a suspect. Claire's fury. That night, Claire confronted the hospital board. "My son nearly died in your care twice. 25 of your doctors failed, and now a prisoner is the only reason he's alive. How do you explain that?" The board members shifted uncomfortably. One muttered, "We can't take the word of a convict as medical evidence." Claire slammed her hand on the table. "Then take it as a mother's evidence. Because I saw with my own eyes he saved Ryan and you stood there useless." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's past surfaces. Later, Rebecca approached Marcus in the hallway. "Why are you helping us?" she asked quietly. Marcus studied her face before answering. "Because once, somebody didn't listen when I begged them to. My brother died in prison from the same thing, contaminated food. They called it an accident. I called it murder. Nobody cared, nobody believed me, so I learned to see what others ignored." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. For the first time, Marcus wasn't just a prisoner. He was a man carrying scars no one wanted to hear about. The world splits outside. Protests raged louder. Supporters of Ryan demanded justice against whoever poisoned him. Others cheered Marcus as a hero, chanting his name. But not everyone was convinced. Some shouted that the prisoner staged it all for attention. News panels debated endlessly. "What does it say about our system?" one commentator asked, "when a man in chains solves what professionals cannot?" The story wasn't just about Ryan anymore. It was about race, power, and the uncomfortable truth that wisdom can come from where society least expects it. A new fear. Back in the ward, Patel gathered the team. "We're not dealing with a patient anymore. We're dealing with a target. Until we know who's behind this, every one of us is in danger." The staff exchanged nervous glances. Who among them could be capable of poisoning a police officer under the world's eyes? Marcus leaned forward, his chains clinking. His voice was steady, almost chilling. "You're asking the wrong question. It's not just who, it's why. And until you answer that, this won't stop." His warning hung in the air like smoke, suffocating, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. Twice in 1 week, Officer Ryan was poisoned, first with glass, then through his IV, and twice, 25 doctors missed it, while a prisoner in chains saved his life. So here's the burning question. Do you believe Marcus is the hero in this story? Or could he secretly be the villain? Comment below, hit like, and don't forget to subscribe, because what's coming next will test every assumption you've made so far. The hospital felt like a trap that day. Every hallway hummed with machines and low voices. Reporters circled the entrance like birds waiting to see what would fall. Inside, the ward where Ryan lay felt smaller, as if the room itself was holding its breath. He had survived the glass. He had survived the tainted IV. But survival had not brought safety. The idea that somebody had tried to end him twice, under the hospital's very roof, kept settling over the team like a weight they couldn't lift. Security doubled down. Nurses kept their hands where supervisors could see them. And every face in the hall carried a possibility of guilt. Marcus sat, chained near the window, watching the people who watched him. He wasn't celebrated. He wasn't thanked properly. He was still a prisoner. But everyone in that ward knew the truth. Without him, Ryan might already be gone. Detective Riley arrived that morning with a badge and a tired expression. He had the look of a man who slept in his car, ate takeout between calls, and had learned the hard lesson that justice was never clean. He didn't look over at Marcus as he came in. He didn't need to. Marcus had already drawn more lines in the dirt than most detectives did in a week. Riley moved fast. He spoke to Dr. Patel in the hallway, then to security, then to the nurse who'd been caught with the syringe. The nurse was a young woman named Lena Alvarez. She was shaking in a chair, wrapped in a hospital blanket. Her eyes were wide, not because she feared discovery. She feared something else entirely. The way people who had been given orders feared. Riley sat down across from her. He put his badge on the table and kept his voice low. "Tell me what happened." She stared at the badge like it might bite. For a long beat, she said nothing. Then the story poured out in short, broken pieces. She hadn't intended to hurt anyone at first. She'd been told to be careful with the medicinals, to check the IV bags twice and log each bag in a journal. When she asked why, her supervisor had shrugged and said, "Just follow procedure." But one night, a temp nurse who'd been brought in by someone from outside the hospital, someone with an ID badge that didn't match any staff roster, had pulled her aside. He had pockets full of small syringes. He'd said, "Make sure the third bag gets the drop." He'd told her there would be time to flush it later, to make it look like nothing. He'd said a name, not a command, but a reason. He knows too much. Lena's hands trembled as she recounted the moment. I froze. I didn't know what to do. I thought, maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he meant a different bag. I didn't want to be the one who caused a panic. So She stopped, pressed a hand to her mouth. Tears leaked down. I put the syringe down. I was going to tell someone in the morning, but when Ryan started crashing, I panicked. Then Marcus yelled, and I saw the syringe and Her voice broke. They said if I talk, they'll hurt my sister. They said they'd make it look like I stole medication. The ward, which had been loud with the rustle of papers and the beeping of monitors, went quiet. Every face tightened. Lena's words were a thread that led somewhere dark. Riley kept his face neutral. "Who is they?" he asked. Lena shook her head. "I don't know a name. I swear I don't. I was only told where to stand, what to check. They wore a suit over scrubs. They smelled like cologne and coffee. They wouldn't look me in the eye." It was the kind of description that gave a whole city 1,000 suspects. But it also told Riley something important. Someone with access and with money was moving through the hospital. And they weren't wearing the map of the place. They were moving like they owned the corridors. Riley stood, pacing once, twice. He looked toward the room where Ryan lay. The man's chest rose slowly now, hand held by his mother Claire. He had been taken down, but the battle had shifted. It was no longer only about saving his organs and stabilizing his vitals. It was about finding a human who wanted him gone. He turned back to Lena. "Think. Did you see the man's face? Anything about him? A tattoo? A watch? A ring?" She closed her eyes as if searching the memory that burned. He hummed when he walked. He tapped his fingers on the IV poles. He kept checking the time like he was making sure something lined up. He said, "Not tonight," when someone called on a radio. That's all. Riley wrote it down anyway. Humming, tapping. Not tonight. Small things could be large things if you stitched them right. Outside the ward, cameras had been everywhere since the chaos began, in the parking lot, the hallways, outside the staff entrance. Security had started reviewing footage. They found something. Not a clear face, not a badge that matched any hospital roster. But they found a car idling in the delivery area at 3 a.m. An SUV with tinted windows. A driver who waited until a staff member opened a side door and slipped in. A hand reached out, gave the staff member cash, and a small thumb drive changed hands. It was a money move, not an accident. It pointed at people who could make things disappear or arrange them to be invisible. Riley paced the footage until the pixels blurred. He pulled up employee logs. He cross-checked who had been paid extra. He noticed a pattern, a handful of off-the-books entries made around the same time the temporary nurse had been signed in, people being paid for night assistance, people whose names didn't match active rosters. The list wasn't long, but it was enough. It said someone had paid to make a problem happen. Back in Ryan's room, Marcus watched all of this like a hawk. He kept his voice soft when he spoke, because loud voices made guards nervous and because the room had a way of listening. He didn't trust Lena. He trusted patterns. He trusted how people moved. He told Riley quietly, "They're trying to make it look messy, so you give up." He tapped the table with a fingertip. "They buy people in the hospital like they buy silence in courthouses." Riley glanced at him. "You got more?" Marcus closed his eyes for a second, running a face in memory. "There's a rhythm to how they work. Notice the IV logs, who touched each bag. Notice who signed the temp in. And watch the delivery docs. They come in the same way dirty money comes in. Small drops, not big shipments. They don't want a truck. They want a person the cameras miss." Riley nodded. He trusted the data more than anyone's mouth. He had spent years learning how to read lists and dates until the paper told him things people weren't brave enough to say. He left to pull the supply logs. Claire, Ryan's mother, kept vigil by the bedside. Her hands were rough with worry and prayer. She watched Marcus, the man who had saved her son twice, chained like a criminal. The sight made something like grief flare into her chest. She finally leaned forward. Her voice was a worn ribbon, soft but steady. "There's one other thing," she said. "Something I never told the police." Marcus's head turned, eyes sharp. "The man who pulled the strings? He didn't just want Ryan gone because of a case. He wanted someone gone because of what that someone knew." She swallowed, and the ward seemed to lean in. Claire's hands twisted. "My brother, Jonathan Hale. He's a prosecutor. He was getting close to people who run things in this town. He was building a case against someone with a lot of money. The night of the raid. Jonathan was supposed to be out of town. We planned it so he wouldn't be there. But something changed. Ryan took his place." Marcus's jaw tightened. The thread of motive straightened into place. If Jonathan had been the target, whoever wanted him gone would have been happy to have someone else take his place. Someone visible, someone who could be erased under the guise of street violence. If Ryan had stepped in for Jonathan, then the people who wanted Jonathan silenced had settled for Ryan. "You're saying Ryan was in the wrong place by accident," Riley said slowly. "Or by design." Claire pressed her hand to her mouth. "He did it on purpose. He said if Jonathan's name was going to cost him his life, Jonathan's family shouldn't pay. He took the risk." The room went hollow with the weight of that choice. Sacrifice like that didn't keep itself secret for long. The people with power noticed when a life gave itself up to protect a prosecutor. They also noticed who was left standing with a ledger of grudges. Riley tightened his grip on the clipboard. Motive had become clearer. Access had been shown. Now he needed a suspect who had both reach and cold patience. Marcus watched Claire and thought of his own past, of promises broken and of people who believed they could buy to make dangerous things vanish. "They don't use guns when they can make it look like an accident," he said. "They use hands that aren't theirs and faces that fade. Money buys you that." Riley was already pulling files. He made calls, quiet ones, to people who still owed him favors. He checked the prosecutor's docket, who had enemies, who had been threatened. Names came back. Developers with city contracts, contractors who paid for silence, an advisory board with members who had ties to a drug distribution network and to City Hall. The list grew, and it tightened like a noose. The more he pulled, the more he realized a picture was forming, a picture some people would kill to keep out of the light. That night, as the ward settled into a tired quiet, Marcus sat back in his chain and stared at the ceiling tiles. He'd been wronged plenty, but this feeling was new. A sense that the hospital had become a front line. Not because of disease, but because of deliberate action. They had weapons that didn't show on tests. hands that moved under the cover of routine, and an enemy who watched cameras and payrolls to find their way. He turned to Riley, who was writing down names. "You want to make a move, make it quiet. Whoever ordered that syringe isn't going to stick their head out again. They'll bury their tracks." Marcus's voice was calm, but every word carried the weight of someone who had survived by seeing the small things. Riley nodded. "We move tonight. We start with the delivery docs and the temp logs. We question the board's recent contractor payments." Outside the ward, the world continued to yell. In the ward, a small plan took root, the kind that grows in the shade. Careful, patient, lethal only when it has to be. Marcus would be there in chains, watching, and Riley would be the officer who could put the threads together. But as they set the weeks to come in motion, none of them saw the shadow folding back into the hospital's supply room. The quiet figure who had watched the cameras and who had an alibi filled with witnesses who were paid to breathe in the same direction. Someone had a ledger. Someone had gloves. The next move would be theirs, and that move would have to be perfect. The hospital had gone quiet after midnight, but quiet did not mean peace. The walls hummed with the low drone of machines, and every light in the hall flickered as if the building itself was restless. Officer Ryan slept, his chest rising and falling in fragile rhythm, while Claire prayed at his bedside, her lips moving with the steady rhythm of a mother who refused to surrender her son. Detective Riley had not left. He camped out in a plastic chair near the nurse's station, files spread across his lap, his pen clicking in restless bursts. He wasn't the kind of man who believed in luck. He believed in pressure, in watching suspects until they cracked, in pulling threads until the sweater collapsed. But this case wasn't giving him the threads he needed, and so he had made a choice. If the corruption moved through the hospital's back doors, then he would put his eyes on those doors. Not tomorrow. Not with paperwork. Tonight, at 1:15 a.m., Riley slipped down to the loading docks with a single guard. The air was cold, tinged with the smell of disinfectant and oil from the delivery trucks. The guard, a young man named Ellis, kept shifting on his feet like the silence was too heavy for him. "Detective, what exactly are we looking for?" Ellis whispered. Riley didn't answer at first. He scanned the lot, eyes narrowed, breath fogging in the air. Finally, he muttered, "We're looking for someone who doesn't belong here but moves like they do. Watch for confidence. Watch for someone who isn't afraid of cameras." Ellis nodded, clutching his flashlight, but he was nervous, and Riley knew it. By 2 a.m., nothing had happened, just an empty parking lot, a humming vending machine inside the staff lounge, and the sound of Ellis's shoes tapping. But then, at 2:17, headlights cut across the far corner of the lot. A black SUV rolled up slow, idled for a moment, then backed into the shadow near the dumpsters. Riley's chest tightened. Same model, same timing, same method as the footage he'd reviewed. The passenger door opened. A man stepped out, broad shoulders under a long coat, cap pulled low, walking with an ease that suggested authority. He didn't hesitate. He moved to the side door of the hospital like he'd done it a dozen times before. He didn't fumble. He didn't pause. Ellis gripped his flashlight tighter. "You want me to?" Riley held up a hand. "Wait." The man rapped on the door 3 times. A pattern. 3 quick, 1 pause, 1 slow. Within seconds, the door cracked open. A nurse, not Lena, not anyone Riley recognized, slipped him a badge and a clipboard. The man handed over a small envelope. The nurse looked inside, nodded once, and vanished back through the door. The SUV didn't linger. It rolled forward, then disappeared into the night. Riley's hand twitched toward his radio. He wanted to call it in. He wanted to follow. But instinct told him it wasn't time yet. They didn't have enough. All they had was a car, a shadow, and a nurse whose name he didn't know. Marcus speaks up. By morning, Riley was back in the ward, his face lined deeper than before. He went straight to Marcus. "You were right. Riley said, pulling up a chair. They're still coming through the dock. Marcus didn't look surprised. He just tilted his head, eyes narrowing. Did you follow them? No, Riley said. I don't chase shadows without a net. Marcus leaned forward, chain clinking as he shifted. Then you better build one fast, because whoever that was, they don't leave things half done. If Ryan's still breathing, they'll keep trying until he isn't. The words hit harder than Riley expected. Claire stiffened in her chair, her hand tightening over her son's. Why him? She whispered. Why not someone else? My son isn't a target. He's just a cop. Marcus didn't answer right away. He studied her face, then said softly, Your son stood in front of a bullet meant for someone else. That makes him the target now. And the people who hired that man? They don't leave loose ends. The hidden record. Later that day, Riley went digging through staff logs. The night shift roster showed nothing unusual. But when he checked the night assistance entries, the off-the-books line items Marcus had pointed out, he found a familiar timestamp. 2:15 a.m. A signature marked the entry, sloppy, almost careless. It wasn't a nurse Riley recognized, but when he ran the name through the system, it came back linked to a staffing agency that had shut down 2 years earlier. A ghost nurse, a fake entry, a paper trail that led nowhere. Riley cursed under his breath. He knew this game. He'd chased it before. The players used dead companies and ghost employees like masks, slipping in and out of official records. Every time you thought you had one, you realized you were holding smoke. But then Marcus, watching him from across the room, spoke. You're missing something. Riley looked up. What? Marcus nodded toward the sheet. That signature. Sloppy, yeah, but sloppy on purpose. That's not a nurse. That's a man who doesn't want to be remembered trying to sign like a woman. Look at the loops. Too heavy, too wide. You want to find your guy, don't look at nurses, look at men on the payroll who weren't supposed to be there. Riley blinked. Damn prisoner was right. Again, by evening, the hospital was cracking under the weight of rumors. Families whispered in the waiting room. Reporters outside shouted questions through the glass doors. Was an officer poisoned inside the hospital? Were staff members working with criminals? Was the city hiding something? Claire had to walk past those voices every time she stepped out for air. Each question cut at her, twisting her grief into anger. She wanted to scream that her son was innocent, that he had done nothing but his duty, that the real criminals were the ones walking free. But she stayed silent, holding her pain like a weapon. Riley watched her. He knew the toll it took. He'd seen it before. Families turned into unwilling symbols, their grief pulled apart by strangers. And he knew it would only get worse the longer the case dragged on. A twist in the night. That night, just after midnight, the ward lights flickered again. Marcus sat upright, every nerve in his body on edge. He'd lived too long in places where flickering lights meant danger. A shadow passed the window. Slow. Careful. Marcus's voice cut through the quiet. Someone's here. The guard by the door frowned. It's just maintenance. No, Marcus said, standing despite the chain. Maintenance doesn't move like that. Before the guard could react, the fire alarm blared. Red lights strobed through the hallway. Nurses shouted, patients panicked, and in the chaos a figure slipped into Ryan's room. Marcus lunged, chain clattering, slamming into the intruder's shoulder. A syringe skittered across the floor. The guard grabbed the man, wrestling him against the wall. Riley came running, gun drawn, shouting for order. The intruder was no nurse. He was dressed in scrubs, yes, but his arms bore tattoos hidden under sleeves and his shoes weren't regulation. He didn't speak. He just glared, lips pressed tight, as though silence itself was his weapon. When they searched his pockets, they found only one thing, a folded piece of paper with 3 words scrawled in black ink. Not tonight. Yet. The hospital locked down. Sirens echoed outside. Reporters screamed for answers. Inside, the ward fell into a suffocating silence. Riley held the note in his hand, his jaw tight. Whoever this man was, He wasn't the mastermind. He was a pawn, a warning. Marcus leaned back in his chair, breathing hard from the fight. You see now? They're not just trying to kill him. They're sending a message. And the message is, they decide when. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steel. Then they'll learn something else. They don't decide everything. Not while I'm still breathing. The ward went quiet again, but it wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the quiet before another storm, one that was already building beyond the hospital walls. The night inside the hospital carried an unusual stillness. Machines hummed. Nurses whispered. Doctors walked quickly in the hallway, but their faces were heavy, showing the weight of helplessness. Officer Daniel lay unconscious, his chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm. 25 doctors had tried and 25 had failed. His heartbeat was slowing down, his body weakening by the hour, and no one had a clue why. It was in this moment of despair that a surprising twist entered the story. Marcus, the prisoner. He had been placed in the hospital under tight guard after suffering a collapse during his court hearing. A chain clinked softly against the rail of his bed. His past was a mess of crime, violence, and regret. But tonight, something about his eyes showed clarity, almost as if fate had placed him here for a reason. Marcus noticed what others didn't. While the medical team focused on charts, scans, and blood reports, he was watching the officer's body itself. He wasn't looking at numbers. He was watching for the human signs, the twitch of a finger, the discoloration of skin, the shallow gasps that seemed to fight against something invisible. His instincts told him this wasn't just a regular medical collapse. Something else was at play. At first, Marcus said nothing. Who was he to speak? A man chained to his bed, with guards stationed at the door, carrying a record of mistakes longer than most people's patience. But when Daniel's breathing grew worse, Marcus leaned forward, tugging at his restraints. "Hey," he rasped, his voice cutting through the sterile silence. "You're all looking in the wrong place." The doctors froze. The guards frowned. A nurse shot him a glare. But Marcus didn't stop. He locked his eyes on Daniel and whispered 3 words that made everyone pause. "Check his neck." The room went still. For a moment, nobody moved. It sounded ridiculous. 25 doctors had worked for hours. They had tested blood, scanned organs, pumped medicines, but none of them had thought to check for what Marcus suggested. The lead doctor, skeptical but desperate, walked to Daniel's side. He pulled back the collar of the officer's hospital gown. And that's when his hand froze. A faint swelling, almost hidden. Subtle enough to escape trained eyes, but clear enough now under closer inspection. The room filled with a sharp tension. Could this be the clue everyone had missed? Could a prisoner, chained and powerless, really have spotted what the experts overlooked? Guys, stop right here for a second. This is the kind of moment that makes you question everything. 25 doctors, all with years of training, had missed this tiny detail. Yet a prisoner, someone society had cast aside, saw it instantly. Do you think that's pure instinct or something deeper? Let me know in the comments what you believe. Was Marcus gifted with sharp observation, or was it just coincidence? And don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because the next twist in this story will leave you stunned. Back inside the room, panic quickly turned to urgency. The doctors moved fast, shining light on Daniel's neck, pressing carefully around the swelling. Marcus called out again. "Don't waste time. It's pressing on his airway. He's not getting enough oxygen." The doctors didn't want to admit it, but the prisoner was right. His words carried a raw certainty. A specialist rushed in with emergency equipment. Nurses prepared suction and tubes. Within minutes, they discovered something shocking. An allergic reaction had triggered a blockage around Daniel's throat, one that none of the sophisticated scans had picked up in time. Had Marcus not spoken, Daniel might not have survived the night. The guards stared in disbelief. The lead doctor looked pale, shaken. And Marcus? He simply leaned back against his bed, eyes dark but steady. For a moment, the line between criminal and savior blurred. As the medical team worked to stabilize Daniel, the whispers spread across the hospital floor. A prisoner had seen what 25 doctors missed. A man condemned by society had just given a dying officer a fighting chance. But the night was far from over. Saving Daniel's life once didn't guarantee survival, and Marcus had only just begun revealing what he knew. Family, let's pause here. Can you see how life can twist in ways nobody expects? A cop, respected by the system, was slipping away. A prisoner, rejected by the system, was the one who pulled him back. That's irony right there. Tell me in the comments, do you believe people like Marcus deserve a second chance when they show redemption like this? And if you're still watching up to this point, you're clearly locked into this story, so make sure you hit that like button. Let's keep pushing this video out so more people can learn the lesson hidden in these moments. The beeping of the monitor steadied slightly. Daniel's breathing improved. Hope flickered back into the room. But everyone knew this was not the end. This was only the beginning of a deeper mystery. Because the question remained, how did Marcus know? He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't trained. And yet, he had seen it instantly. The answer to that question would open an even bigger chapter in this strange, controversial journey. One where the line between guilt and redemption, crime and humanity, authority and humility, would be tested like never before. The hallway outside Officer Daniel's room buzzed with whispers. Nurses passed notes. Guards exchanged uneasy looks. Doctors argued in low voices. Word was spreading like wildfire. A prisoner had noticed what 25 doctors failed to see. Inside the room, Daniel rested with new equipment helping him breathe easier. The swelling around his neck had been reduced after quick intervention. His chest rose steadier now, but he was still fragile, still hovering between life and death. The medical team felt relief, yet it was laced with discomfort. Because the truth hung heavy in the air, their authority had been shaken by a man in chains. Marcus lay on his bed across the room, hands cuffed to the frame, guards posted by the door. His face was calm, almost too calm for someone surrounded by chaos. He didn't brag, he didn't shout. He simply watched the doctors scramble, the nurses hurry, and the officer fight for his life. The lead doctor, Dr. Harris, finally turned toward him. "How did you know?" His tone was clipped, almost demanding, but beneath it was a tremor of doubt. Marcus shrugged. "I just paid attention." "That's not enough," Harris snapped. "No ordinary patient would have spotted something that subtle, not when our scans missed it." Marcus's eyes hardened. "Maybe your machines are too busy chasing numbers. I've lived in places where nobody cared to scan you. You had to learn to read the body itself, the way skin changes color, the way breath stutters. I've watched people die because no one noticed fast enough. You don't forget signs like that." The words hit heavier than Harris wanted to admit. For a moment, the hospital room felt like a courtroom, the prisoners schooling the doctors on their blind spots. "Family, stop right there. Let me ask you this. Have you ever noticed that sometimes the people with the least resources can see things the experts miss? It makes you wonder, is real wisdom born in classrooms or in the harsh lessons of survival? Drop your answer in the comments because this part of the story is about to get even more controversial. The guards shifted uneasily. To them, Marcus was still a criminal. His insight didn't erase the years of bad decisions written into his record. Yet, in this moment, he was the one everyone was listening to. As the night stretched on, Daniel's condition stabilized. But beneath the relief was a growing unease. Because Marcus's intervention raised questions that no one wanted to answer. Why was a cop's life saved by a prisoner's words? And what did that say about the world they all lived in? By dawn, the news had reached the higher-ups. Hospital administrators, police officials, even media outlets had caught wind of the bizarre turn. Cameras began circling the building. Journalists smelled a story that was too strange to ignore. Prisoner saves cop's life after doctors fail. Inside, tension reached boiling point. Dr. Harris called for a private meeting. Guards, nurses, and administrators filled a small room. Everyone argued over how to handle the situation. Some wanted to keep Marcus's role quiet, bury the story before it embarrassed the medical community and the police force. Others argued the truth couldn't be hidden forever. Through the walls, Marcus could hear the raised voices. He smirked faintly. He had spent years silenced by the system, and now, for once, the system was debating what to do with his voice. Guys, here's a tough one. If you were in charge, would you tell the world the truth, that a prisoner saved a cop's life? Or would you cover it up to protect the reputation of doctors and the system? Be honest in the comments, because this decision shapes what comes next in the story. Back in the room, Daniel stirred. His eyelids fluttered. His hand twitched weakly. For the first time in hours, he whispered a sound. Raspy, broken, but alive. The nurse leaned close. "Officer Daniel, can you hear me?" He barely nodded. His lips moved, forming words that no one expected. "Who saved me?" The nurse hesitated. She looked at Dr. Harris, who stood frozen. For a long pause, no one answered. But Marcus, still cuffed to his bed, spoke from across the room. "I did." Daniel's eyes, cloudy but searching, turned toward the voice. He stared at the man chained by guards, the man society had branded dangerous. For a moment, their gazes locked. The irony was too heavy to ignore. A cop breathing because of a prisoner's observation. Daniel's lips curved weakly. Not into a smile, but into something more complicated. Recognition, confusion, a flicker of gratitude mixed with pride that didn't want to admit it. The room felt like it was holding its breath. That night, the hospital was no longer just about saving a life. It had become the stage for a clash of worlds. Authority versus underdog. Reputation versus truth. A cop versus a prisoner. And for the first time, the balance of power was shifting. But Marcus wasn't finished. He had seen more than just the swelling in Daniel's neck. He had noticed other details, things the doctors still hadn't pieced together. And if he was right, Daniel's battle wasn't over yet. Family, let me lock your attention right here. This is where the story starts pulling deeper. Marcus didn't just save Daniel once. What he was about to reveal next could shake everything. Drop the emoji in the comments if you're ready to hear what Marcus exposes in the coming chapters. And remember, don't just watch, engage, because this story is a lesson about pride, power, and the human ability to notice what others ignore. Daniel drifted back into fragile sleep, but the weight of his question lingered in the room. Who saved me? That question was more than just about life support. It was about truth, about recognition, about whether society would ever admit that a man in chains had given value where none was expected. And as Marcus closed his eyes, one thought circled his mind. They think this is over. But it's only the beginning. The hospital's waiting room looked less like a place of healing and more like a courtroom. Families huddled in corners, whispering. Police officers leaned against walls, arms folded, eyes darting with suspicion. Journalists pressed their faces against the glass doors, their cameras flashing each time someone walked past. Inside Daniel's room, calm had been forced but not earned. Machines beeped steadily. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Doctors rotated in shifts, keeping close watch, pretending everything was under control. But beneath the professional masks, their confidence had cracked. Marcus knew it. He could see it in their rushed steps, in the way they avoided his eyes. He had rattled them, and they hated it. Dr. Harris entered again, clipboard in hand, speaking low to the team. Vitals are holding but not improving. We're missing something. The nurse glanced toward Marcus's bed. Harris followed her eyes but quickly snapped, "No, we don't need more distractions." Marcus's voice cut through the room. "You do, and you know it." The guards shifted, but Marcus didn't flinch. His words weren't loud, but they carried weight. "I told you before, this isn't just swelling. There's something else happening. You've been treating symptoms, you're not asking why." Dr. Harris bristled. You think you can diagnose what trained specialists have spent their careers studying? Marcus stared back, calm but sharp. I think sometimes pride blinds men more than illness. The silence that followed was brutal. Even the machines seemed to pause, the beeping softer for a moment. Family, let's pause right here. How many of you believe pride has stopped leaders, doctors, or even people in your own life from doing what's right? Drop a comment with "Pride kills" if you've seen it happen. Because in this story, pride isn't just an emotion, it's a threat to a man's life. In the hallway, Daniel's wife, Maria, arrived with their teenage daughter, Emily. Their faces were streaked with worry, their clothes wrinkled from a sleepless night. When Maria entered, her eyes darted to the bed where her husband lay still. "Oh God, Daniel," she whispered, gripping his hand. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "Why you? You're the strong one. You're the one who always makes it home." Emily stood frozen, staring at the wires and tubes. Her voice cracked. "Mom, is he dying?" The nurse looked away. Maria pulled her daughter close, whispering, "Not if I can help it." Then her gaze landed on Marcus. "You," she said sharply. "They told me you saw something they didn't." Marcus didn't speak right away. He could feel the guard's eyes burning into him, warning him to keep quiet. But Maria stepped closer, her voice trembling between gratitude and desperation. "Is it true? Did you really save my husband?" Marcus finally nodded. "I pointed out what they missed." Maria's chest tightened. She turned to Dr. Harris. "Why didn't you see it? Why did a prisoner chained to a bed notice something 25 doctors overlooked?" The question struck like a slap. Harris's face reddened. We're still running tests." "No!" Maria snapped, her voice cutting sharper now. "That's not good enough. My husband doesn't have time for tests. I want to know why a man in prison clothes seems to care more about his life than the people wearing white coats." The entire room froze. Harris's authority, once unquestioned, was collapsing under the weight of a wife's fury. "Family, pause. If you were Maria, would you trust the doctors? Or would you listen to the prisoner who already noticed what they didn't? Be real in the comments, because this choice will split the room." Dr. Harris stormed out, muttering under his breath. The guards looked uneasy. Maria turned back to Marcus. "What else do you see?" she asked. Marcus hesitated. He could stay quiet and protect himself, or he could speak the truth and risk exposing everything he had pieced together. His voice dropped low. "The swelling wasn't the real danger," he said. "Your husband's body is reacting to something foreign, something he came in contact with before he collapsed. That's what's killing him." Maria's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Marcus leaned forward, chains clinking, "that somebody wanted him like this." The words cracked the air like thunder. The nurse gasped. Emily clutched her mother's hand. The guards exchanged worried glances. For the first time, the possibility no one wanted to admit stood in the open. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't just a sudden medical mystery. Officer Daniel might have been targeted. "Family, let me hit you with the question of the night. If Marcus is right, who would want to hurt a police officer so badly they'd poison him slowly, right under everyone's nose? Drop your guesses in the comments, because the twist we're stepping into will shake the entire storyline." Outside the hospital, protesters had gathered. Some carried signs demanding justice for police officers. Others shouted about corruption, accusing the system of protecting its own while silencing the truth. News vans lined the street. Reporters shouted into cameras. Developments inside remain unclear, but whispers suggest a prisoner may have played a role in stabilizing the injured officer. The story had broken free from the walls. It was too big to hide now. Back in the room, Maria whispered to Marcus, "If you know something, tell me. Don't let him die." Marcus looked at her, then at Daniel's fragile frame. His eyes flicked to the guards at the door. He knew speaking would put a target on his back, but silence was worse. So he leaned forward, his words carrying both danger and hope. He didn't just get sick, He was poisoned, and I can prove it. Family, don't move. Marcus just dropped a bombshell. Poison. Do you believe him? Or do you think he's just playing a game to win favor? Comment below with your thoughts because the next chapter will push this story into full-scale chaos. The word poison spread through the hospital like wildfire. Nurses repeated it in whispers. Guards stiffened when they heard it. Even the janitor, pushing his cart down the hallway, froze mid-step when the rumor reached his ears. By the time Dr. Harris returned to Daniel's room, administrators were already buzzing. His face was pale, his jaw clenched. "That prisoner is lying," he snapped. "We have no evidence, no lab report, no toxicology, nothing." But Maria stood firm, her eyes sharp with fury. "You had no evidence when you told me you didn't know what was wrong either. And he was the only one who saved my husband when you all were failing." Harris's voice cracked louder. "You want to trust the word of a criminal over a team of specialists?" Maria didn't flinch. "I want to trust the word of whoever saves my husband. Titles mean nothing to me right now." The room fell silent. Even Harris knew her words carried the weight of every family member who'd ever felt let down by people in power. Family, let me stop you here. How many of you agree with Maria? Drop a, if you believe sometimes the truth comes from the most unexpected places. Because right now, the person everyone's calling a criminal might be the only one fighting to keep this officer alive. Emily, Daniel's daughter, clutched her father's hand tighter. Her young voice cut through the tension. "If he says it's poison, then check for it. Why won't you just check?" The simplicity of her plea made everyone pause. It was a question no one could argue against. Dr. Harris exhaled hard, rubbing his forehead. "Fine. We'll run the toxicology screen, but I want it clear this is a waste of time." Marcus didn't respond. He just watched as the team rushed to collect samples, his expression unreadable. Hours dragged on. The hospital lab worked overtime, the tension in the waiting room growing unbearable. Outside, media vans multiplied, the crowd swelling. Protesters now shouted two competing chants: "Trust the doctors" versus "Listen to the prisoner." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The town was split down the middle. Meanwhile, in the secure ward, Marcus was approached by one of the younger guards, Officer Blake. He leaned close, his voice low enough that the others couldn't hear. "You really think he was poisoned?" Marcus studied him. "I don't think." "I know." Blake's jaw tightened. "If that's true, then someone inside the department is dirty. And if word gets out, this whole place is going to burn." Marcus smirked faintly. "Maybe it needs to." The guard straightened quickly, but the look in his eyes showed Marcus had planted a seed of doubt. "Let me ask you something, family. If the system itself is corrupt, would you burn it down to save one life? Or would you protect it to keep the peace? Drop a fire emoji if you'd expose the truth, no matter the cost." By nightfall, the toxicology results came back. The staff crowded into Harris's office. The paper trembled slightly in his hand as he read it. His face drained of color. Positive. Traces of a rare chemical, one not typically found in accidental exposures, were in Daniel's system. The room erupted. Some shouted in disbelief. Others demanded silence. Harris slammed the report down. "This doesn't prove anything. For all we know, he had something to do with it." He jabbed a finger toward Marcus's room, but the accusation sounded weak, desperate. Everyone in the room knew it. The prisoner was chained, guarded day and night. The idea that he orchestrated this poisoning didn't hold. Maria's voice broke the noise. "Say it out loud. My husband was poisoned. And if that man hadn't spoken up, you would have let him die without ever knowing." The truth landed heavy. "Family, let's lock in right here. The toxicology confirmed it. Daniel was poisoned. Who do you think is behind it? A criminal on the outside? Or someone inside his own department? Drop your theories in the comments because this is where the story takes a turn into dangerous territory." That night, the hospital was surrounded by flashing lights, not just ambulances, but police cruisers and news vans. The chief of police himself arrived, storming into the building with a wall of officers. His face was stern, his voice sharp. "Who leaked this?" he demanded. "Who told the press about poison?" Reporters shouted questions as he pushed past. "Chief, is it true a prisoner spotted what your doctors missed? Do you have suspects in the poisoning?" The chief ignored them, but the fire was already out of control. The headline was everywhere. "Cop saved by prisoner, poisoning suspected." Inside, Daniel's condition wavered again. His heart rate spiked, monitors blaring. Nurses rushed in, stabilizing him once more. Maria clutched his hand, whispering prayers. Marcus lay on his bed, eyes open, calm in the chaos. He had been through storms before, but this one was different. This one could break the walls of the system that had caged him. And as he closed his eyes, one thought burned in his mind. The truth is out. But the real fight is just beginning. Family, this chapter leaves us on fire. Poison is confirmed, the town is split, and the chief is desperate to shut it all down. Drop A in the comments if you're ready for the next twist, because lines will be crossed, and trust will be shattered. The night Samuel drove home from the penitentiary, the city lights blurred through his windshield. His pulse hammered, not just from his worsening condition, but from the words Raymond Marlowe had burned into his head. "Guilt is a poison. Speak it, or it will kill you." For weeks, 25 doctors told him to prepare for death. They said his body was shutting down, his brain deteriorating. Yet not one of them had dared to ask what weighed on his soul. Now, for the first time, Samuel wondered if his enemy wasn't a disease at all. But silence. The breaking point. At 2:15 a.m., Samuel collapsed in his kitchen. His coffee mug shattered across the tile, dark liquid spreading like blood. His chest clenched, his vision spun. His teenage daughter, Madison, rushed downstairs in panic. "Dad," she screamed, dropping to her knees. "Please stay with me." Samuel gasped for air, clutching her hand. In that moment, all the guilt he had buried came crashing back. The years he spent chasing criminals instead of being home. The nights Madison cried herself to sleep after her mother walked out. The way his obsession with duty turned him into a ghost at his own dinner table. That was the scar, the hidden wound Raymond had seen. "Call," Samuel wheezed. "Call Dr. Felton. Tell him it's not the brain. It's the heart." My friends, pause with me here. Imagine this. You're a teenager, kneeling on the kitchen floor, holding your father's hand as his body seizes in front of you. The doctor said his brain was failing, but you can feel his heart beating erratically, like it's trying to claw its way out of his chest. Who would you believe in that moment? The medical experts with their charts? Or the prisoner who warned you weeks before? That's the razor's edge this story is walking on. Hospital war. By the time Samuel reached the hospital, his body was trembling uncontrollably. Dr. Felton and the team rushed in with their machines, their wires, their endless scans. "Detective Hayes," Felton said with forced calm, "your neurological tests are unchanged. It's consistent with advanced degeneration." Samuel shook his head weakly. "No, it's not my brain. It's my heart." Felton frowned. "We've run every cardiac test. Your heart shows no structural damage." Her words cracked something open in Samuel's chest. For the first time in decades, he wept openly. And the machines around him slowed to a steady, calmer rhythm. So here's where we leave a prisoner saw what 25 doctors missed. Samuel's body wasn't dying from disease, it was dying from guilt. And now, finally, the truth is bleeding out. But here's the real cliffhanger. Confession may have calmed his heart tonight, but tomorrow, someone very powerful will try to silence both Samuel and Raymond, because not everyone wants the truth to come out. Would you risk everything to confess your darkest scar, if it meant saving your life? Drop your thoughts below, because this story is going to collide with secrets bigger than Samuel ever imagined. The night after Samuel's confession, A storm rolled over the city. Heavy rain pounded the hospital windows as if nature itself was warning everyone inside. The truth always comes with a cost. Samuel finally slept, his chest calmer, his breathing steady. Madison dozed in the chair beside him, her hand still gripping his. For the first time in weeks, it seemed like peace had arrived. But peace, in this city, never lasted long. A visitor in the dark. At 3:04 a.m., the hallway outside Samuel's room echoed with footsteps, not the hurried shuffle of nurses or the brisk march of doctors. These steps were slow, calculated. A tall man in a dark trench coat slipped into the hospital wing. His badge clipped neatly to his breast pocket read, Internal Affairs Bureau. His name was Agent Carter. Carter wasn't here to save Samuel. He was here to silence him. The hidden threat. When Dr. Patel filed her preliminary notes about Samuel's heart condition, she included one detail she thought was harmless. Patient's stress appears linked to unresolved guilt and possible workplace trauma. Patient referenced conversation with inmate Raymond Marlowe. That single sentence had set alarms ringing in places Madison and Samuel could never imagine. Because if Raymond Marlowe was right, then the entire narrative about his conviction could collapse. And if his conviction collapsed, powerful men would fall with him. Agent Carter stepped into Samuel's room. Madison stirred in her sleep, but he moved like a shadow, placing a file on Samuel's nightstand. When Samuel blinked awake, Carter leaned close and whispered, "Detective Hayes, for your daughter's sake, drop this prisoner nonsense. Keep quiet, or you'll both regret it." Okay, my friends, pause right here. Think about the weight of that scene. Samuel just found a lifeline through truth, and yet now, truth itself has become the most dangerous weapon against him. Would you stay silent if a man in power threatened your child? Or would you risk everything to keep speaking out? Comment below, because this is where the moral heart of this story begins to burn. The conflicted cop. Samuel's hands shook as Carter left. He stared at the file on the nightstand but couldn't bring himself to open it. Madison woke up moments later, yawning. "Dad, you okay?" He forced a smile. "Just a bad dream, sweetheart." But it wasn't a dream. It was a warning. The next morning, Samuel asked Dr. Patel for privacy. "Doc, listen. If what you're saying about stress-induced cardiomyopathy is true, then confessing helped me. But someone doesn't want me talking. They'll come for me." Patel's eyes widened. "Detective, who?" "Internal Affairs. Carter. He left me a file." Patel's face paled. She'd heard whispers about Carter, a man who cleaned up messes for the Bureau by any means necessary. Raymond speaks again. Meanwhile, inside the penitentiary, Raymond Marlowe sat cross-legged in his cell, his eyes closed, his mind somewhere far beyond the gray concrete walls. When the guard announced visiting hours, Raymond smiled knowingly. He already felt it. Samuel's confession, Samuel's tears, Samuel's moment of breaking. And now, Raymond knew the war wasn't just inside Samuel anymore, it was outside too. When Dr. Patel came to see him later that week, Raymond said only one thing. "They'll come for him. But remember this, fear is just another kind of poison. If he doesn't speak, the poison wins. If he does speak, they'll strike. Either way, he must choose." Patel swallowed hard. "Then what do I tell him?" Raymond's voice was calm. "Tell him the scar has two sides. One heals, one kills. His choice decides which." Friends, do you feel the tension building? 25 doctors couldn't find the truth. One prisoner did. But now, the cost of that truth is climbing higher every day. Let me ask you this. If someone held the key to your healing, but society branded him a criminal, would you listen? Or would you shut him out to protect your pride? This story is pulling us into that very question. The test of faith. Back in the hospital, Samuel opened the file Carter left. His hands trembled as he flipped through the papers. They were photos, surveillance stills, crime scene shots, and witness statements. But what froze him was the last page, a picture of Madison leaving school circled in red ink. The message was clear. If Samuel kept talking, Madison's life would be in danger. Samuel's heart monitor spiked again, alarms blaring. Nurses rushed in, but he pushed them away. "It's not my heart," he rasped. "It's the weight. It's the silence." Madison clutched his hand, tears streaking her face. "Dad, don't let them scare you, please. You've carried secrets your whole life. Don't die carrying theirs." Her words lit a fire in him. For the first time, Samuel realized that his daughter's courage was stronger than his fear. The turning point. That evening, Samuel asked to record a video statement. Dr. Patel brought her phone, trembling as she hit record. Samuel looked straight into the lens. His face was pale, his body weak, but his voice carried the weight of 30 years. "My name is Detective Samuel Hayes. I served this city for 3 decades. 25 doctors told me my body was failing, but they missed the truth. A prisoner named Raymond Marlowe saw what they didn't, that guilt, silence, and buried scars can kill as surely as any disease. I am living proof of that. If anything happens to me or my daughter, know this. Silence was forced upon us, but today, I choose truth." He ended the recording with tears in his eyes. And here's where we end. Samuel has broken the silence, but now he's placed a target on his own back. Internal Affairs wants him quiet. The Bureau wants him gone. And somewhere in a prison cell, Raymond knows the storm has only just begun. So here's my question for you. Would you have pressed record? Or would you have stayed silent to protect your family? Comment below, because the war between silence and truth will explode into the open. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the city, but it brought no peace. Samuel's video statement had already left Dr. Patel's phone. She uploaded it to a secure cloud, unsure if it was the right move. But deep down, she knew once Samuel chose truth, there was no turning back. By noon, the video had leaked. Not to the news, not yet, but to circles that mattered. Police brass, internal affairs, politicians who thought their secrets were safe. And with one trembling confession, Samuel had become a target. The hospital siege. It started with whispers. Nurses whispered about unmarked cars in the parking lot. Orderlies whispered about strangers in suits walking the hallways. By evening, the hospital felt less like a place of healing and more like a cage tightening around Samuel. Madison noticed first. "Dad, why are there men outside your door? They're not doctors." Samuel turned his head weakly, his heart monitor beeping faster. "Because, sweetheart, some people are afraid of what I've said." Madison's jaw tightened. She was just a teenager, but fire sparked in her eyes. "Then let's say more." Pause with me here, friends. A young girl looks authority in the face and refuses to back down. That's courage. That's the kind of courage that terrifies powerful men more than any weapon. Let me ask you, if it was your child standing there, would you shield them from danger or let them fight beside you? Comment below, because this is where Samuel faces that exact choice. The return of Agent Carter. At 9:47 p.m., the door swung open. Agent Carter stepped inside, his trench coat dripping from the storm outside. He closed the door softly, like a man who knew he owned the room. "Detective Hayes," Carter said smoothly, "you've made a mistake. That video will ruin you." Samuel's voice was hoarse but steady. "No, that video will save others. People need to know the cost of silence." Carter's eyes flicked toward Madison. "Your daughter doesn't need to be dragged into this. Withdraw the statement and she walks free." Madison stood. "I'm not afraid of you." Carter smirked. "Brave words. Let's see how long they last." The unexpected ally. Before Carter could step closer, the door creaked open again. Dr. Patel entered holding a clipboard, her face pale but determined. "Agent Carter," she said firmly, "you don't belong here. This is a patient room, not an interrogation chamber." Carter sneered. "Doctor, you're out of your depth." But Patel didn't flinch. Then let me tell you something from inside my depth. I've seen the scans. I've treated the symptoms. Detective Hayes isn't dying of a neurological disease. He's dying of stress. Stress you and your people are amplifying. If he dies, his blood is on your hands, and I'll make sure the whole world knows it. For the first time, Carter's composure cracked. He studied Patel, then Samuel, then Madison. With a cold smile, he leaned down. "This isn't over," he whispered. And then he left. "All right, friends, let's pause again. Did you catch what just happened?" One voice of truth, a doctor, not a prisoner this time, stood against power and forced it to retreat. It makes you wonder, how many times in history did the world change not because of armies or leaders, but because one person refused to be silent? Hit that like button if you believe truth can still beat power. Raymond's vision. Inside the prison, Raymond Marlowe knelt in meditation. He didn't know the exact details, but he felt it. The storm around Samuel. The tug of war between silence and truth. His cellmate whispered, "Marlowe, why do you care about that cop? He put men like you in here." Raymond opened his eyes slowly. Because chains don't just bind criminals. They bind the guilty, the innocent, the silent. If he breaks his, maybe I'll break mine too. That night, Raymond requested another visitor. Not Samuel this time, but Madison. The daughter's journey. The next day, Madison walked into the prison visiting hall, her heart pounding. She had never set foot inside such a place. Barbed wire glistened outside the windows. Guards eyed her like she didn't belong. When Raymond entered, Madison froze. He looked nothing like the monster she had imagined. His eyes were sharp, yes, but there was a softness beneath them. "You're Detective Hayes' daughter," Raymond said quietly. She nodded. "Why did you help my dad?" Raymond leaned forward. "Because I saw myself in him. A man crushed by guilt, poisoned by silence. I couldn't save myself, but maybe I could save him." Madison's throat tightened. "Then help me save him again. They're trying to kill him." Raymond studied her, then whispered, "The scar is deeper than you think. Your father's guilt isn't just about your grandfather. It's about a case he buried, a case that others buried with him. Find that case, and you'll find why they want him gone." Now this is where the plot twists again, my friends. 25 doctors missed the scar. A prisoner saw it. But now the prisoner reveals the scar isn't only personal, it's political. It's tied to a buried case that could burn the system down. Would you dig up a case that powerful men tried to erase, even if it meant risking everything? Comment yes or no. The case file. That night, Madison returned to the hospital with a plan. While her father slept, she opened the file Carter left behind. Buried deep inside were references to a long-closed case, the Miller Street shootings. Samuel had never spoken of it, but the file suggested witness tampering, falsified reports, and a cover-up that reached high into the department. Madison's hands shook. "Dad, is this the scar?" Samuel's eyes flicked open. Pain flashed across his face. Don't go near that case. It ruined lives. It will ruin yours too." "But it's why they're after you, isn't it?" Madison pressed. "It's why you've been sick. You buried this truth so deep it started killing you." Tears welled in Samuel's eyes. He couldn't deny it anymore. "Yes," he whispered. "It's the scar." The cliffhanger. As Madison held the file, footsteps echoed in the hallway again. This time it wasn't Carter. It was worse. 3 men in plain suits entered the ward. Their expressions were cold, their purpose clear. Madison quickly shoved the file under her jacket. "Detective Hayes," one of them said, "we're transferring you to another facility. Orders from above." Samuel's monitor beeped faster. Madison's fists clenched. She knew this wasn't a transfer. This was an erasure. The scar isn't just emotional anymore. It's tied to a buried case that threatens powerful men. Samuel knows it. Madison has the file. And now shadowy figures have come to take him away. What would you do in her shoes? Hand over the file? or fight back against men who could destroy you in seconds. The hospital felt like it had been holding its breath for days. Nurses rushed down the hallways with charts and medications, but none of it seemed to matter. Inside the sterile room where Officer Ryan lay, silence had taken over. His breathing was weak, shallow, and every beep from the heart monitor felt like a reminder that time was running out. 25 doctors had already tried, each with their expertise, each with their certainty. And yet they all failed. His condition worsened by the hour. The strange part? No one really knew why. Tests didn't add up. His body looked fine on scans, but his strength was draining away like sand through a glass. The medical staff argued endlessly. Some thought it was internal bleeding they couldn't detect. Others insisted it had to be a rare poison. But the truth? No one had an answer. And as the clock ticked, his family watched, powerless. The breaking point. Maria sat in a corner of the hospital room, her hands gripping a rosary so tightly that the beads left marks on her skin. She whispered prayers under her breath, refusing to leave Ryan's side. Beside her, Emily held a notebook full of scribbled questions she had asked the doctors. Every answer they gave her ended the same way. We don't know. Frustration boiled in the waiting room. The Harrison family's friends, neighbors, and even strangers from the community filled the hospital lobby. A police officer was dying in front of them, and the most educated minds in medicine couldn't fix it. Some whispered that maybe Ryan's illness wasn't natural. Others pointed to the prisoner who had been brought in for questioning days earlier, Marcus. Rumors about Marcus was a name people weren't comfortable saying out loud. To many, he was a convict, a man with a past full of mistakes. But to others, those who had spent time around him, Marcus was different. He wasn't just another prisoner. He had eyes that studied everything, a sharpness that couldn't be ignored. He noticed details most people overlooked. And that's what scared people. What if Marcus had something to do with this? What if he knew more than he was saying? The guards who kept watch over him swore he hadn't left his cell. He couldn't have touched Ryan. But suspicion spread like wildfire. People love to blame someone when they don't understand what's happening. And Marcus was the perfect target. A prisoner's observation. Late one night, as the fluorescent lights hummed in the hallway, Marcus sat quietly in his chair, chained but watching. He wasn't looking at Ryan like the doctors did, with their machines, stethoscopes, and charts. No, Marcus studied the man himself. He watched the way Ryan's lips turned pale, the way his breathing stuttered at certain intervals, the way sweat pooled on his forehead even when the room was cool. Marcus wasn't a doctor, but prison had taught him something different. You learn to survive by noticing details, the way someone holds a tray, the change in a man's walk before a fight, the sound of coughs spreading through a cell block. Tiny signs no one else cared about. Marcus made a habit of noticing them. And now he noticed something the doctors didn't. The whisper. It was past midnight when Marcus leaned forward, catching the attention of one of the guards. His voice was low, gravelly, but steady. "Bring me closer," he said. The guard frowned. "You got no business near him." Marcus shook his head. "You don't see it. None of you do. If you keep letting them pump him full of the wrong stuff, he won't make it till morning." The guard hesitated, then called in the head nurse. Soon the small hospital room filled again. Nurses, a skeptical doctor, and Maria, who refused to leave. They all looked at Marcus like he was dirt on the floor. But Marcus didn't flinch. He leaned forward as much as his chains would let him, staring at Ryan's chest as it rose and fell. And then he whispered 3 words that made the room freeze. "Check his throat." Shock and resistance. The doctors exchanged confused glances. One of them scoffed. "We've run every scan, every test. His airway's fine." Marcus shook his head. "Not his airway, his throat. Look closer. Something's lodged there. Small. That's why you can't see it in the big scans. That's why he's suffocating slow." Maria's eyes went wide. She grabbed the nearest doctor's sleeve. Please listen to him. What if he's right? But the doctors didn't want to hear it. They were trained for years, honored with titles and awards. How could a prisoner see what 25 experts missed? Pride clashed with desperation. The room filled with tension so heavy you could cut it with a knife. Emily stepped in, her voice trembling but firm. At this point, what do we have to lose? The examination. Finally, one young resident doctor decided to check. She grabbed a small light and carefully examined Ryan's throat. At first, nothing, just swelling from the tubes already inserted. But then, she saw it. Something faint. A small obstruction pressed deep where no one thought to look. She gasped. Wait, there's something here. The senior doctors crowded around. The obstruction was tiny, almost invisible on scans. A fragment of material, possibly from the riot, maybe inhaled without anyone realizing, had been lodged in Ryan's throat. Every breath he took forced it deeper, poisoning his body slowly. Marcus was right. The room fell silent. 25 doctors, stumped for days, and a prisoner had seen it with his bare eyes. A dangerous procedure. There was no time for surgery. The fragment had to come out immediately. The young resident prepared tools while the others set up emergency equipment. Maria clutched Emily's hand as tears streamed down her face. The room echoed with tension, nurses moving fast, machines beeping, doctors shouting commands. Then, silence, except for the resident's voice. Got it. Pulling now. A long second stretched into eternity. Then, a small fragment was removed from Ryan's throat. Blood followed, but his breathing began to clear. The monitor beeped stronger, steadier. His color returned. He wasn't out of danger yet, but for the first time in days there was hope. Reactions, Maria collapsed into tears, whispering, "Thank God. Thank God." Emily sobbed into her shoulder, shaking with relief. The doctors stood frozen. Their faces betrayed the weight of their failure. How could they explain it? A room full of the nation's finest had missed what a chained prisoner noticed from the corner of the room. Marcus didn't celebrate. He just leaned back, eyes steady, like he knew all along. "Sometimes," he said softly, "you don't need a degree. You just need to pay attention." The ripple effect. By morning, the story spread across the hospital. Staff whispered about the convict who saved a cop's life. Some told it like a miracle. Others told it like a scandal. News outlets caught wind. Soon, reporters gathered outside, eager to spin it into headlines. Prisoner saves officer after 25 doctors fail. The irony was impossible to ignore. A man locked away for mistakes had seen what the brightest minds missed. It was a reversal no one could have predicted, and it left the town divided. Was Marcus a hero, or was this just a lucky guess? Should society trust the word of a criminal, or had pride nearly killed a good man? Family. Let's pause here. Think about this. A man society dismissed, chained in a corner, saw what trained experts couldn't. What does that tell us about how we judge people? About how pride blinds us? Would you have listened to Marcus, or would you have ignored him like the others? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear from you. And if this story has you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know where in the world you're watching from. Because trust me, the next part of this story, it only gets deeper. Ryan's breathing steadied. For the first time, Maria slept beside his bed without fear. Emily leaned on her shoulder, exhausted but relieved. The doctors began planning his recovery, their confidence shaken. And Marcus? He sat silently, eyes unreadable. He had done what no one else could, but deep down he knew this wasn't over. Saving Ryan's life was only the beginning. Bigger truths were still buried, and when they surfaced, they would shake not just one family, but an entire system. The sun was rising over St. Augustine Memorial when Officer Ryan opened his eyes fully for the first time in weeks. His body was weak, his voice barely a whisper, but he was alive. The sound of steady breathing filled the room instead of the stuttered gasps that haunted Maria's nights. For the first time, the Harrison family saw hope instead of dread. Maria kissed his forehead, whispering, "You came back to us." Emily clutched his hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Tears streamed freely, but this time they weren't from fear. The impossible had happened. 25 doctors had failed. A man in chains had succeeded. The hospital in uproar. The hospital halls buzzed with whispers. Nurses traded knowing glances. Residents shook their heads in disbelief, and reporters swarmed the lobby. By noon, news vans lined the parking lot. Headlines screamed across every channel. Prisoner spots what doctors missed, saves cop's life. Some celebrated Marcus as a hero, others sneered, insisting it was pure chance. But no matter how they spun it, the truth was undeniable. Without Marcus's words, Ryan would be gone. The irony was bitter. Society had locked Marcus away for his crimes, yet here he was, the reason a decorated officer lived to see another day. Marcus in the spotlight. Marcus didn't ask for recognition. Sitting on the hard chair by the corner of the room, shackles still around his wrists, he stayed quiet. But the weight of the moment pressed on everyone. One guard muttered under his breath, "Never thought I'd see the day a convict saved a cop." Another replied, "Maybe we should start listening more instead of judging by the uniform someone wears." Marcus finally spoke, voice low and steady. "I'm no saint. Don't treat me like one. But sometimes, when you've lived in shadows long enough, you learn to see what others can't." The room fell silent. Ryan's words. When Ryan regained enough strength to speak, his voice was raspy but deliberate. He turned his head toward Marcus. The officer and the prisoner locked eyes, a moment heavy with contradiction. "You saved me," Ryan whispered, "and I don't even know why." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Because I could. That's all." "No," Ryan pressed. "You could have stayed quiet, you could have let me die, but you didn't. That means something." Tears welled in Maria's eyes. Emily looked at Marcus with newfound respect. For the first time, the line between enemy and savior blurred. The town-divided news spread fast. Outside the hospital, the town was split in two. Some praised Marcus. "Give that man a chance. He proved himself." Others scoffed. "Don't forget, he's still a criminal. One good deed doesn't erase the bad." Debates raged online. Talk shows dissected the story. Faith leaders called it divine providence, while critics called it dangerous sympathy. But one thing was clear. Marcus had forced people to confront their own prejudice. If a man society condemned could carry wisdom the experts missed, what else were people blind to because of labels and judgment? Marcus's fate. A hearing was called to decide whether Marcus's actions warranted leniency. Lawyers, judges, and officials gathered while the Harrisons sat nervously in the back row. Ryan himself appeared, still frail, but determined. When asked if he wanted to make a statement, he nodded slowly. "I wear this badge to protect people," Ryan said, his voice echoing through the courtroom. "But protection means more than walls and uniforms. It means recognizing truth, even if it comes from someone we don't trust. Marcus saved my life when no one else could. That's not luck, that's clarity. And I won't stand here and let the man who gave me back to my family be forgotten in a cell." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. "Officer Harrison, are you recommending clemency?" Ryan nodded. "Yes, I owe him more than words. We all do." A shocking twist. The judge deliberated. Legal experts argued that Marcus's crime still demanded accountability. But then new evidence surfaced. Records showing Marcus's conviction had relied on flawed testimony. He had been punished harshly, more for who he was than what he had done. The courtroom erupted. Whispers turned to shouts. Was Marcus not just a savior, but also a man wronged by the very system that locked him away? The gavel slammed. The judge declared Marcus's sentence commuted. He would be released under supervision, given a chance to rebuild his life. Tears streamed down Maria's cheeks. Emily hugged Ryan tightly. The officer who once stood for law had just defended the man society condemned. Freedom in the air. The day Marcus walked out of those prison gates, the world felt different. No uniform, no shackles, just the open sky above him. Reporters chased him for comments, but Marcus kept his words short. I don't want fame, I don't want applause, I just want to live honest. And maybe remind people, don't judge too quick. You never know who might save you. Ryan and Marcus, an unlikely bond. Ryan invited Marcus to his home weeks later, once he had recovered more fully. It was awkward at first, an officer and a former prisoner sitting at the same table. But Emily laughed. Maria served food, and slowly the walls came down. Ryan looked across the table. Funny, isn't it? All my years in uniform, I thought I knew who the good guys were. Turns out life doesn't draw lines that clear. Marcus smiled faintly. Good and bad live in all of us. Sometimes we just need a chance to show which side we'll choose. Family, think about that. 25 doctors couldn't save him. But a man everyone dismissed, a man in chains, saw the truth. How many times do we ignore people because of labels, because of our pride? How many voices have we silenced even when they held wisdom we needed? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Would you have listened to Marcus or walked away like the doctors? Don't forget to like this video if it moved you, subscribe for more powerful stories, and let me know where you're watching from. This channel isn't just about stories, it's about lessons we can carry into real life. Closing resolution. Ryan recovered fully over the months. He returned to the force, but never with the same narrow view. Every call he answered, every person he arrested, he remembered Marcus. He remembered the truth and value can come from the most unexpected places. As for Marcus, he found work at a community center, mentoring troubled youth. He used his past, not to glorify it, but to warn others. Don't waste your life behind bars, he told them. But if you ever get the chance to help someone, take it, no matter who they are. The town slowly shifted. People who once saw the world in black and white began to see shades of gray. A prisoner had saved a cop had defended a prisoner, and through it all, a family had been restored. So here's the lesson, family. Never underestimate someone just because of their title, their past, or the box society puts them in. Life has a way of humbling the proud and lifting the overlooked. Officer Ryan's life was spared not by pride, not by power, but by the keen eyes of a man nobody trusted. Stay humble. Stay open. Because the person you least expect may one day hold the key to saving your life. If this story touched your heart, don't just click away. Hit that like button. Share this with someone who believes in second chances. And of course, subscribe to Top Core for more emotional love stories that will leave you inspired. Now tell me in the comments, do you believe love like Matthew and Emily's really exists in today's world?